And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. Oh, what a fantastic crowd we have out there in the ideas from already tonight. Of course, tonight I am joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, strange days have found us.
Mm-hmm.
Strange days have tracked us down. I could probably do the whole lyric set for that one and keep it in mind. Quite a week indeed. And a number of strange things going on, and our reporting has been right in the heart of it, of course, tracking all of the scientists who have gone missing in the heart of this UFO file maelstrom, you could say, in the buildup to some kind of disclosure coming this summer. Very uneven, and the messaging from the administration somewhat uneven as well. And it was great to get into all these things and kind of open up the Pandora's box for tonight by being on Alex's show last night or yesterday. We had a great time on there. We had 4.5 million viewers live. And it actually, I want to keep saying this about Alex, which is the bravery that he's showing in helping me get these reports out about X-Protect, and then his own investigations around these things, really opening up the subject in a large way. Got this episode off the ground, and it was focused heavily on this X-Protect aspect of the missing scientists. That's what we're getting into tonight, which is opening up what is going on in relation to those that are working on exotic technology, especially when it comes to the UFO file, as we've reported on this program, their relationship to the secret space program, and the larger aspect of this hidden technology coming forward, and forces in the background trying to make sure that does not happen. So we've been in, the thick of it, as it were, getting to the answers on this. Now, we had an MIT scientist back in December 15th, and his name was Nuno Loureiro, and he was the head of the plasma lab at MIT. And the strange nature of his death, I instantly knew there was something going on in relationship to that. And then the backtracking and all the rest, the subsequent announcement of some kind of disclosure by President Trump, and then the fact that Major General McCaslin went missing July 27th in New Mexico right after that. We started to look at the backtrack around McCaslin and found out his assistant had gone missing the previous summer. That's where our reports launched into overdrive starting in January. And we've been doing this track, and then the mainstream media caught up, and they've sent us so many requests in the background for information. And in some cases they've quoted us. In other cases, they just took the information and put it out there with their own spin. But whatever it is that's going on, it's good in this sense on the coverage side, which is we're getting the word out about all of this. And whether it was Fox or Daily Mail or whoever's got in touch recently, they've got a lot of info from this show. And what they've been telling me is, we've been watching the reports. That's how they got educated on this. And what they've been saying is, how did it go from your show up to the president's desk? This is the turnabout. And what I say literally is, the ripple is from the ideas room. And that's literally how it goes, which is, we put the information forward here, and it's that back and forth, that syzygy, as it were, that brings things up to a whole other level. But then the question is, once the public starts to catch on, there's a lot of misinformation that gets spun in as you're doing it. And so we've been putting out the reports, and what they're trying to do now, there's been a series of articles in Vanity Fair, The Atlantic, and others that are just saying, oh, there's no connection to these scientists. Get off this subject immediately. It was just an internet creation and all this other stuff. I'm going to show you how the pattern is so real and so verifiable that there's no mistaking it by any chance, regardless of Vanity Fair or The Atlantic, which are kind of the last holdouts on the wall of secrecy with the New York Times and some others. But the truth is, we're in very deep waters when you see that type of X-Protect activity on the surface. And so I think a number of people have been waking up to this aspect. Tonight, we're going to get into all of it. We're also going to be taking your questions in the second half of the program. And I want to remind you that you can ask those questions at any point during the broadcast. Miss Olivia is going to put them together, and we'll go a couple hours with you here tonight. In the second hour, we will be taking the questions. And Miss Olivia, before I go any further, what do you got?
Payne76 says, just started following you, Daniel, after catching you on Alex Jones about a month ago. I wanted to say thank you for everything you're doing and exposing. You and your insights have brought light into a dark world. The education you are providing is utterly priceless. You're a true patriot and a truth teller.
Oh, fantastic. Wow. And it's great, that you discovered us with Alex and now you're a regular viewer here. It's great to have you with us because what I think is so important, and I stressed it about the Ideas Room, is, it can be even a lone outpost of truth that gets all this information out. And then it's that ripple, it's that back and forth, it's that chemistry that sets off all sorts of conversations. And if I told you some of the people who watch the show, you would hardly believe it. But then again, you just might indeed. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 223, The Missing UFO Scientists. More are missing. And now we're going to show you tonight the paperclip, should say the continuity of paperclip government aspect associated with Huntsville, which some of the people involved now, not only were they directly related to the Huntsville NASA aspects and the Redstone Arsenal and others, Marshall Space Center, but also some of them, including Amy Eskridge, pointed out the fact. We're going to read some of her quotes tonight. And of course, she tragically died, and the official ruling was suicide, but there's a great deal of, shall we say, legitimate suspicion around it because there's just a number of things that don't add up, including the fact that she was warning about the possibility of being removed by these shadowy covert groups for the types of things that she was putting out. And I can say this, some people like to, get the word out there in different ways. Some people are in the heart of it and they never get the word out there. One of the things that she had to say is that if you stick your neck out in public, at least somebody will see if it's, you run into trouble in that way. And that if you're hanging out in the background, the odds are much higher that something would go amiss and nobody would even know. But I'm going to read her quotes on it tonight because she puts it very eloquently. And again, when we're dealing with these stories, we're dealing with an aspect of human tragedy. And I want to be clear about that. It's a tragedy in any case. And it's certainly a tragedy that there are groups in the background, covert forces that try to control the output and how this technology gets to the public. And they stand there as a guard between the public and this type of very hidden information. So when we look at that, we know that those groups are operating and we need to expose them in order to take away their very destructive, to counteract that threatening hand, as it were. One of the things I want to say also is we don't, there's been a lot of insinuation by mainstream media because they don't understand the subject matter. This is also the problem around the UFO file and why they got taken in by all the CIA counterintelligence players, But one of the things that they're saying is, there's nothing, there's nothing to this. And it just so happens that they're scientists, big deal, You don't understand the depth of the research that you're entering into when you're getting into dark journalism in particular. And I'm going to show you this now as an echo across time. And I'm going to show you how this echoes literally across a century. But let's start with 1988. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
The baffling case of the dead scientists, plural there, right? Take a look at this group. This is from 1988. They were working on SDI Star Wars. They were all eliminated. They were all dealing with this advanced technology. And again, SDI Star Wars was set up as a UFO grid. Ostensibly, it was set up to take out ICBMs. But a number of people came forward, including Colonel Corso and others, and gave us a very different picture of what was happening there. And we know Reagan himself, during his presidency, was talking a lot about the alien presence, and they had to take it out of his speeches over and over again. That's a fact. And, the Gipper, as it were, with his type of mentality, would have been thinking, well, I'm just the guy that can handle that. I can put this out there for the American public and they'll get it, because he had seen the intel on the inside. What they had tried to do is paint the intel that they were giving Reagan at that time, especially Bush and others, that it was a UFO threat. And so you could see him talking about it as a threat, but it also scared him quite a bit into rushing with Star Wars and SDI. Now, listen to this, and then I'm going to correlate it with one of the latest scientist death around the UFO file and NASA. And what's going to be interesting here is the fact that the scientist in question comes from Huntsville, as did Amy Eskridge, who we just quoted recently, as do many of the others that are featured tonight. We're going to get into what that background is in Huntsville, Alabama, how it was the home of Paperclip, and how that's how the space program got its wheels. This is the key factor. And that's how all of the space headquarters are now going back to Huntsville and being moved out of Colorado. These are the key things that I think are going to really make a difference in how we see things. We could see Trump going along with this, and Trump making a move to put our space command in Huntsville in his first term, getting rebuffed, and the Biden administration holding off, keeping it in Colorado, and then here's Trump again saying, no, we're moving it, and we're moving it to Huntsville. That's where it's going to be, and that is the home of von Braun and others et al. So, December 2nd, 1988, SDI scientists, 22 of them die under mysterious circumstances over a short period of a year and a half. 22.
That's insane.
Yeah. 7 a.m. on Sunday, August 28th, Alistair Beckham, 50, a software engineer at Plessy Defense Systems for 15 years, drove his wife, Mary, to her job as a part-time nurse. He told her he wanted an early start to spend the rest of the sunny bank holiday painting in the front window of their house in suburban Surrey. The windows were never painted. Instead, according to the police, Beckham went to his tool shed, locked the door, stuffed a handkerchief into his mouth, wrapped electrical wires around his body, connected them to the mains, bypassing the fuse with a paper clip, and flicked the switch. Those cases, if you study them in earnest, you're going to see all of the same types of moves, all of the same types of unusual activities, all the same types of glib explanations for these deaths as you're seeing in this case. There are patterns to these types of activities. And when you're getting on assassination programs, you have to understand how the deep state operates. When you enter in an aerospace element, then you have to understand the deep state X-Protect part that we've put forward. And X-Protect is the name of the group that we put forward that will keep the secrecy at all costs. And their general control systems include the media and others. And what they will do is destroy reputations or, kill stories, whatever it would happen to be. But they are known because they're part of this intelligence aerospace wing for their assassination activities. So we have to be very aware of that. And over again, as we've come into these public, this kind of season of public assassinations again with the Trump administration, when during Trump's campaign, and he was shot and he was shot at. And then, of course, Charlie Kirk and others. We have to understand is the coverage has gone in all kinds of weird places, but over and over again, the thing that is getting missed is the deep state is, they've been responsible for the assassination culture in America since the 1960s. And you see people running around to all these different types of conclusions. You have to go right to the deep state to find out what's going on, because it is that milieu that spawns assassination, cover-up stories. You need that kind of control. So you can't accept the official version, but you also can't go for the junk conspiracy. You have to be on top of both. And that's how we'll do it on this show here tonight. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. We are going to go deep tonight in X Series 223, the missing UFO file scientists, more missing scientists, and the Paperclip Huntsville connection, the continuity of Paperclip government. Think about that. That's what we're talking about here with COG. We've been putting on the record with this show the role of aerospace in the heart of all of this, and it's going to be very easy to demonstrate tonight since all of the people we're talking about, with very rare exception, are working exactly in that milieu of advanced aerospace. I want to remind you, especially if you're new here, too, to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our free newsletter. And what that does is it keeps us in touch around the massive censorship that we experience in putting out this information. And basically, all you're going to get is an update on all the incredible shows we have coming up for you, interviews that will blow your mind. Of course, we have Gigi Young coming up, Dr. Joseph Farrell, others at the end of the month. Just incredible work coming your way. Mini-series, a docu-series, and JFK and the UFO File is one of them. Of course, Atlantis, the Craze in the Hot Zone series, that whole, unhacking Atlantis. These are all really heavy duty productions. There's a lot of power packed information in there, and we love presenting that for you. It's all there in the newsletter. So stand up and be counted. Make sure that you go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for that newsletter. That's going to keep us in touch and keep the pipeline open, regardless of social media and the games that get played. Someone was telling me recently they put us in the music category. And when you went to go search in that category, you were surrounded by rap artists. That's right. Well, my new rap album, I guess I'll have to put that together since YouTube wants us to be a rap star now. But there's all kinds of just, hijinks that go on. The best way to get around it is, it's a much easier back and forth. And it is interesting when I do Alex's show, and we had a blast yesterday doing that. And Alex was at his very best. And we were talking actually also about how he felt about being called out by the president of the United States, who was saying, hey, he's fired, and hey, he's bankrupt, and all these terrible things to his real hardcore lifelong supporter there. I mean, how do you do that? And of course, the problems with Tucker that the president has, and Tucker regretting that he ever helped the president get in. These are the types of things that the Trump administration has to fix, and has to stop listening to the wrong voices around the, expeditions out to war territory like Iran and things like that. Just pull that situation back. Whatever was going on there, whatever war plans you got coerced into, back it up and get your supporters back on track, because the domestic agenda was, there were a lot of things going on there, and this has really flipped the situation out, including the fact that the economy might, showing signs of stress because you're defeating all of this oil activity. And it's creating severe geopolitical problems. So, but I asked him that because, Alex was asking me all the questions relating to the UFO file. And I just took that minute to ask him, because I think that is kind of intense if you're out there and if you're cheerleading for this guy, and then, you help him get in a couple of different administrations, and he goes on your show and all the rest. So, you want to leave it open that Trump can turn around and be more like Trump 1.0. But I wanted to get Alex's response like that. And he had to think about it, genuinely. And I think what he was saying was, I was going to tell him the truth no matter what. And that's the position to take. It's the same position we take on this show, which is I'm going to deliver the truth on this regardless, and that's the important aspect of this. And tonight I'm going to talk also about a couple of things and a couple of moves and movements out there that are using Peter Thiel's influence and Peter Thiel's money to adopt things that we do originally on this show. And I'm not going to hold out and observe it, much longer. I'm going more to bringing it to the public's attention and doing something about it. But it's very interesting because as we come into this period of the summer, which I will call the summer of disclosure, you're going to be seeing all these factions coming out to play, as it were. But before I go any further, Miss Olivia, you're up.
Okay, so Amarillo Gunrunner says, remember the Cybertruck guy that blew up in the front of Vegas Trump Tower? Didn't his manifesto mention him having knowledge of anti-gravity propulsion projects? Related?
No question about it. And that Livelsberger, who was a special ops guy, he blew up his Tesla in front of Trump Tower in Las Vegas to kick off the beginning of the Trump administration. The amount of messaging that was involved with what he was doing, and supposedly he was driving to Area 51. And he mentions the UFO file in there in relation to what he was doing. And it's not exactly clear what was going on there, but the message was dramatic that this had to do with Tesla, and the whole Elon Musk aspect, and then Trump and Trump Tower. There's no question. And the truth is that at the beginning of Trump's administration, Musk was there a lot, and he was overshadowing Trump in a lot of ways. It was kind of amusing, but it got to be, I think, burdensome, and then he got to be a drag on the ticket, as it were. And finally, about 6 months in, there was just a complete falling out because he was pushing this Jared Isaacman on Trump to be the leader over at NASA. And I believe that what he wanted was, SpaceX on one hand has the greatest repository of, because of all the satellites, of UFO activity in space and in orbit. And they wanted NASA as well. He wanted the NASA activity, and he figured billionaire Isaacman, who was formerly a Democrat, I don't know what he is now, but they wanted him in, and Trump said, no way, he's a Democrat. And that's when the big falling out happened. And that's where, out of the blue, Elon was like, Trump, Epstein, and all that, which is unusual if you think about it. And, but they cooled it off after a while, but I don't think it ever really got right again. Something in that, and I think we'll have more to say as we go along on that. So I've shown that the pattern happened here earlier with the scientists being bumped off in relation to aerospace and SDI. Now we have something in the pipeline called the Golden Dome. Didn't you know you're in the golden era? Well, this is what Trump had to say. We're in the golden era, and here's the Golden Dome, and it does what SDI was supposed to do, but it's 40 years later, and baby, we've got the technology. This was supposed to, on one hand, take out these hypersonic missiles if they were coming in. But it also takes out threats from space. And when you're dealing with the UFO file, again, over and over again, it's been the dream on the inside to have some type of defense system against this other thing. Now, to call it defense, I think is kind of interesting. But nonetheless, it's a $300 billion project. And you could even say that, it's not even exposing the project of the Golden Dome. I mean, there's a ton of things that are built into it that aren't good, like surveillance of everything that's beneath it, and the role that Palantir and others have in there. But one of the contractors that's involved with the Golden Dome, which is very much Star Wars too, is Blue Halo. Now, Blue Halo is very interesting because it's the very same company that General Neil McCaslin was working for as a consultant before he disappeared. True, he had retired from Wright-Patterson, and true, he had retired from running the UFO file there officially and working in that lab for 10 years, and other aspects of his duties, including at Kirtland, which is another major UFO hotspot. And they're both related directly to Albuquerque, which is where he was. Now, so before I get into the really hardcore Huntsville aspects, I'm going to touch base on this a little bit to see what was going on here and why exactly McCaslin disappeared in the first place, why his assistant had disappeared earlier, and why the person who was navigating part of that team also disappeared. All three of them disappeared, and she coming out of Los Alamos as well. I want to, just before I get into that, also say some of the naive coverage on the congressional side, it's very hard, how do you upgrade them? I've contacted them before, and they're in this loop where, they're just kind of addicted to getting the outrage part around UFOs or whatever, getting the attention part. They're not going deep. And if they're planning congressional committees, somebody asked, Luna point blank, and she's been the point woman on a lot of this for some reason. And she said, well, they were like, is the CIA obstructing you in your pursuit of UFO files? And she said, oh, no, they've been great. We've been getting great help from the powers that be. What? No, you can't take that attitude with the CIA. The CIA is literally the reason why there's a secrecy wall around all of this. And the X-Protect group, which is not exposed, they're related directly to the aerospace aspect. That goes all the way back to the Kennedy assassination, and we've demonstrated it on this program. So when you see these types of stories, you're not going to get anything from Burchett or Luna or whatever. They don't know anything. Everything they know, they're sat down in a skiff and told, you know. Ooh, and when you sit down with Luna, because she's coming in from, this kind of religious aspect, you just tell her, oh, they're demons. It's related to Enoch. When you get Burchett, you sit him down and say, like, oh, yeah, it's this incredible program and their agents are everywhere. And so whoever you're talking to, you just spill them what they think are secrets, and then they think that they're in the know. This is part of the issue that's been going on. Now, when we look at the case of McCaslin, that's the last picture, by the way, of General McCaslin, and it's very close to where he disappeared as well. But this is the terrain, and this was the trajectory of his hike that day. Of course, we've recounted the details of his disappearance on this program before. I'm just going to say, to summarize, that he had left some important things behind that you wouldn't leave behind. And this started the pattern of all this, which was the leaving the phones behind. In another case up here in Wakefield, someone who's working on a very specialized project at Novartis was Jason Thomas. And when he disappeared, he left his smartwatch in the mailbox along with his phone at home. So the signal there, and you see it over and over again, and in the case I'm going to recount of the brilliant 29-year-old scientist from Huntsville, Alabama, LeBlanc, he also will end up leaving his phones at home. So there's a pattern here that these people, when they work at the secrecy level, are being instructed to meet someone, to leave their stuff at home, and these are the instructions. They've known them from the beginning. They might even think they're going to some kind of emergency drill or what have you. But I want to snapshot again that what we have from WikiLeaks is so important and so vital in the McCaslin case that it throws off the New York Times, Vanity Fair, The Atlantic, and their stupid objections to the idea that these scientists are just missing and randomly, and it's no big deal. If we go back, there's a WikiLeaks entry where they were doing this incredible thing with Assange during the 2016 election. They were dumping out emails related to the Hillary Clinton campaign, specifically because they could see the types of hijinks that she was pulling with the DNC to make sure that she got in as the candidate. So when they started to do this, in the middle of it were all these emails that they kind of mistakenly got caught up in the batch. And it was Tom DeLonge, the Blink-182, fried ex-rock star. And he was building up a UFO team to investigate this stuff. And he's writing to Podesta, trying to get him working with the people he's working with. And he goes directly on the record that McCaslin is the key person. And of course, the literal email in the WikiLeaks batch, now you just can't deny it. It's from January 25th, 2016. The name of the subject of the email is General McCaslin. And what he says here is he's mentioned he's a skeptic. He's not. I've been working with him for 4 months. I just got done giving him a 4-hour presentation on the entire project a few weeks ago. Trust me, the advice has already been happening on how to do all this. He just has to say that out loud. But he's very, very aware, as he was in charge of all of the stuff when Roswell crashed. They shipped it to the laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. General McCaslin was in charge of that exact laboratory up until a couple of years ago. There's no question about it. He's absolutely right here. He not only knows what I'm trying to achieve, he helped me assemble my advisory team. He's a very important man. Indeed, he was a very important man. This email wasn't supposed to see the light of day. It was a private communication between DeLonge and John Podesta, who was also nefariously around the UFO file. So what we have then is the thing that links McCaslin directly to that. And as we go deeper, we can see, oh, wait, he's into this project. He's into that project. He's right in the heart of the UFO redevelopment program. And for my money, he was running it probably for the better part of a decade. Keep that in mind as we look at his disappearance. Now, I want to point out that a lot of this pattern of the people who were going missing started with the reports that we had done about a case that not a lot of people knew about. You see, the thing is that we ran and have done the secret space program research, but we ran conferences and events related to it, and then we've also done documentaries about it and all the rest. But in the conferences, you interface with a lot of we had people who were speakers that knew a great deal about this in the background. And I think we put together the best teams around this. One of the people was Mark McClandish. And McClandish, his family had a deep history in the Air Force. And then he himself was noted as a really excellent illustrator for the Air Force for 25 years. And, doing the illustrations of their programs in process. McClandish's supposed suicide, struck me very strangely. And I only interacted with him once in relation to setting him up at the conference. But after his death, people who were associated with him came to me and said, this guy had plans. He was buying a farmhouse. He was looking forward to all these things. And I started to go back through the many well-designed images that he had created of the craft of the secret space program that he had drawn either from memory or from descriptions of the people on the inside. And I started to realize that he was a kind of a major player in this, and that his work in revealing this, particularly the work around the flux liner and other craft that he had put together, that his method of demise, as it were, with a shotgun, struck me very much like some of the cases that I had looked at earlier with the scientists, but it also had struck me that there were a number of things like this associated with political committees and things like that when I had studied deep state assassinations over the course of many years. And I started to see that pattern, and you can see it, in things like the Kennedy assassination. Whenever they put the panels together, there'd be a wave of deaths, and the odds of those people all dying at the same time. They couldn't afford to have witnesses even 30, 40 years after the fact in that case. And the intelligence agencies really ran for the hills and pushed very hard around that one, regardless of the fact that the public understood it totally differently. That if you go back to 1963, that the president was removed by an intelligence coup. Now, when I was thinking about McCaslin, I was looking at the sketches and starting to devise an idea that there was a group out there pushing for a different timetable and a UFO threat. And I'd been pushing against the people who came out, like DeLong and others, when they came out with all the CIA people, as I've put on the record, like Semi-Van and all the rest. These people were devising a UFO threat operation. They ran it through the public. They had counterintelligence agencies at the front with it. We have to understand when we're looking at the missing scientists that the two stories are directly related. And if you can't get that, and if they do a committee where they're just like, oh, scientists are missing, and I hear in the skiff that the craft are terrifying. If you knew what I knew, if you knew what I could see, that's going to be good for, a Fox News clip or some kind of a X social media thing, but it's not going to get the subject matter anywhere. You need a committee that is dedicated to the idea of getting to the truth of the entire situation. The way you can do that is to take a look under the guise of the missing scientists and say, who was trying to organize and orchestrate a UFO threat? And some of those people, CIA people, even admitted to it. So that's the way you can turn this entire subject matter around, which is if you can get to the heart and the root of the intelligence activity of launching the UFO threat, then you're going somewhere. Because you can open up the entire subject, and then you can say, well, the scientists who are being eliminated, would they interfere with that somehow? If somebody like McClandish had seen craft and been able to draw the craft that we already have, well, then this idea that, oh, here's this version of disclosure, he could easily say, well, these things, these particular versions of things already existed in the 1980s and 90s. So, too much knowledge hanging out there. The other aspect of this is anti-gravity and the developments around anti-gravity. It is those researchers in particular that were targeted, and we're going to get into that next as we go deep, deep into the more missing scientists, unfortunately. And the Paperclip X-Protect Huntsville connection revealed on this program tonight in X Series 223. Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Blazon River. Aren't these missing people the kind of people you would save/take underground if it was known of a coming event?
Yeah, I suppose you could. One of the things I was trying to convey in the last episode, and I did it right at the end, so I'm going to do it again in this episode, is about retirement and how retirement works. And when these people go to retire, the intelligence agencies consider them much more volatile prospects than when they're under the aegis of the working for a department of the U.S. government. So when they're retired, yeah, they're still bound by certain types of security oaths, but the situation is different. And one of the things that I pointed out, which was ripped apart like like crazy. I'm going to explain the different documentaries that came out on the heels of my reports that were just taking the material and repositioning it for their own good. It was totally insane practice. But one of the things that's so crucial is about the memory metal aspect of this, because at the heart of this is Monica Reza, who was the assistant of McCaslin, and her Mondeloy patent. It is that special nickel alloy that can resist heat and which can make our own engines go anywhere without these types of issues, without having to rely on Russian thrusters and things that we were doing for years. We were relying on the Russians. No, she had come up with this now and patented it sometime around 2003. She owned the patent, but the patent, no question, came directly out of the redevelopment of the magic metal, the mystery metal, directly from the Roswell crash, after they had spent a lot of time with it. And one of the things that I put on the record was a very mysterious article, which I'll read here. And I'm also going to read what the memory metal was all about. And this is going to take us back into a classic case, which is the Roswell case, but how it expanded out and how they put it into industry in a number of variety of places. But when we see those people who come out of the UFO File programs adopting their own patents and then selling them back to NASA, I believe that that corridor exists because there was a certain point in history where the government had to almost offshore the development of the UFO File so there'd be no paper trail. And I think unscrupulous intelligence agencies and corporations took advantage of that. And that's who I think that we are at the mercy of when it comes to these stories and why we're seeing these scientists disappear. All right, we're going to go back in time. Where's the back in time music somewhere? Oh, yes. Time travel is real. I can attest to it. Well, look, 2009, story comes out in the Herald Tribune, right out of Sarasota, Florida. This is so important, and here's how it goes. It's by Billy Cox from May 2009. So what does that put it? 17 years ago? Yeah. With a boost from Sarasota residents, Tony Brigaglia, who like a UFO investigator for a while, the enduring Roswell UFO controversy is about to swing into the spotlight onto one of the most successful research and development entities in America, Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio. Now, Battelle is very crucial because what happened when they got this material from the crashed UFO, they took it to Wright-Patterson after a short stop in Texas. And Jesse Marcel talks about that. What they did, they realized they needed specialists that they didn't have there, and they brought it into Battelle. And Battelle would also put themselves under the umbrella of a nonprofit to avoid the types of paper trail traps that you could get in the case of something being dealt with officially by the military. At issue are some missing reports from Battelle's study of nickel titanium alloy called nitinol. When I first put this on the record, by the way, a number of people sent me, they had worked with nitinol for years and it had done all these incredible things. It had medical applications. And it was an incredibly flexible metal and the things that they could do with it. So they had reports that were missing from Battelle, and contracted by the U.S. Air Force, Battelle was being contracted to assess and exploit its compelling properties in the late 1940s. Okay, you see the Roswell correlation here. Battelle participates in or manages 6 national laboratories for the U.S. Department of Energy, including Oak Ridge, Lawrence Livermore, and Brookhaven. Brookhaven, particularly famous for kind of early versions of CERN. The problem is neither Battelle nor the U.S. Air Force can produce copy of what the scientific literature refers to as second progress report. Bergelier suspects that's because the data is still highly classified due to its source, a flying disc that crashed outside of Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. Personal testimony is one thing, says Bergelier, whose research skills have been polished by his business as an executive search consultant. But when you start talking about documents in the history of science, unlike testimonials, their provenance is not questioned. Now, there's a whole complete piece around this where all these reports went missing. And nitinol before 1947 seemed to have limited use, limited application, and all the rest. Suddenly, bang, 47, 48, its use and application goes off the charts. They have these great patents around it. And by the time you get into the 60s, it can do all these incredible things. Now, what's fascinating about all that is it had been piggybacked in. That is the memory metal that had been discovered at Roswell. They had a traditional patent. The way nobody would find out about it is you just roll it in and suddenly this thing is supercalifragilistic. But how did it get that way? Well, it's utilizing the memory metal technique that they found and rediscovered through the Roswell metal. Now,
Sneaky.
it is. And the thing is, when you get to that metal and the stories about it, you can go, and I've read them. There are literally hundreds of testimonials about people who saw it, what it could do, and the remarkable properties that it had. Of course, starting with Jesse Marcel, who said you couldn't burn it. You couldn't put a dent in it. You could roll it up and it would go back into its own shape. It was also light as a feather, and in some cases it would levitate. Some of those
would levitate?
It would levitate. Yeah, it would just float out in the air.
Wow.
Yeah. So there were so many things about this memory metal. It was completely off the charts. Now, if you combine that story and the list of those stories with the patent that Reza does later, remember, she is McCaslin's assistant for 5 years. They're working to redevelop that into a product that can heighten their space potential, and they do it. The only problem is she takes the patent somehow, as I said, using that strange corridor. So I believe that made her and McCaslin and anyone around them, that team, a threat, especially when they get around disclosure. These people have seen it all and been working with it for 20 years. Well, some of them they can trust on the inside, and others they see have their own, problems with dealing. They want to deal with the public honestly, or they already have patents around this thing. So therefore, it's going to be very hard to cover up. So we're in a weird situation when we get around the McCaslin disappearance, because you can see these factors having a dramatic impact on the story. So we have to keep all that in mind as we develop why these people suddenly disappeared. Monica Reza, she was the one who had the patent. She was McCaslin's assistant. She disappeared 6 or 7 months earlier, June of 2025. Melissa Cassios worked at Los Alamos. It's my contention that what Cassios was doing, and she's been, they've had this trend lately of these ex-FBI people on this case saying, oh, so-and-so didn't have a clearance. Oh, look who they threw in with the missing scientists and administrative assistant. Haha. Her clearance at Los Alamos gave her access to the top secret projects at Los Alamos. You will need administrative assistants when you're doing this kind of work who can pass the information back and forth between the respective parties. So don't let them fool you or throw you off with any of these ex-FBI people who, by the way, make such bogus mistakes. And I've had to point it out to them on X and other places. There's one in particular who's out there who thought that Amy Eskridge was Charles Eskridge and gave a whole reason why his cause of death wasn't suspicious. Well, we weren't even talking about Charles Eskridge, whoever the heck that was. We were talking about Amy Eskridge. So, you know, they're just throwing them out there and they're glomming on. They don't know a great deal about the topic either. So, but they play well for, you know, CNN or Fox or whatever, try to tamp people's minds down about the whole thing. Oh, no, they're not missing. Um, and in particular, it's interesting because when Trump came out and they pressed him on it, he said, well, yeah, I hope it is all coincidence, but we'll look into it because some of the scientists involved are very important. Well, they're going to need Trump, you know, out of the way on that too. They can't have him looking deeply at it because he's going to think to himself, well, this is suspicious. We've got UFO file scientists who are disappearing en masse, you know. So putting these stories out there and having ex-FBI people is like the phony credential in the whole thing. It's smart in this sense, which is if you put CIA people out there direct, they'd fall right into the fact that we've been calling them out for the counterintelligence trap that they are. So it would be harder, you know, but the FBI people, they can make it seem like, oh, we've looked into this and there's nothing to it, you know. And over again, of course, just like in any case, they'll say, well, the family has given up on it. Why don't these researchers give up on it? Families, for a number of different reasons, including threats, lack of knowledge, you know, whatever it happens to be. There's a number of cases where the families believe in the beginning that something is going on, and then they get, you know, this total brainwash activity by the law enforcement. So there can be pressures and all kinds of things. So yeah, you have to be respectful when you go into it, but it's investigative journalism. That's what you're there for. I remember all those stories when I reviewed all the early researchers who were looking at the John Kennedy assassination over and over again. There were these headlines, you know, pushing back against them like, oh, you know, they don't know how to treat the family and they should leave the family in their grief and, you know, let the CIA get away with killing them and don't look into it. You know, this kind of absurd, hypocritical take. Now, they're using the same thing on these missing scientists. So we need to watch it as they do it. The other thing I can see them doing is trying to pivot the story off to Chinese scientists. Now, look, there's no question there's great control on Chinese scientists working around antigravitics and other advanced technologies. They may employ the same exact techniques or worse, yes. But it's important that we are looking at American scientists in this case who disappeared while dealing directly with the UFO file here. That's crucial, and it should not be confused with other things that are going on. And I'm sure those other things are going on. But the mainstream media is trying to pivot away to these Chinese scientists. Stay on target. Stay on target. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Deep, deep, deep tonight in X Series 223, the missing UFOs, scientists, paperclip. What is the Huntsville X Protect connection? And what would continuity of government be if it's continuity of paperclip government? The aerospace companies have to be addressed. In the heart of all this, we're going to do it all in this episode as much as we can for tonight. We're also going to take your questions coming up here in about a half hour. Before we do it, what do you got?
Roger Claiborne says during the Cold War, assassinations and kidnappings of each other's scientists was part of spycraft.
Yep.
Most likely scenario shouldn't be ruled out here. It just broke earlier today that 9 top Chinese scientists in the same fields were taken in 2023. So these could be payback if it was us.
Well, you can look at that. I do see, I want to put this on the record. I think the Chinese scientist story is interesting. However, the media is pivoting off the story. So the media is worried. Look, we organically generated the story on this program with deep research. And we brought the cases forward and we rattled the entire, kind of establishment on this. What happened was a number of people were looking at it and going to the FBI with it. Congress people were doing it. Finally, it came up to the president's desk just a week ago. And so that story to land on the president's desk is gigantic because he is now looking at what were marginal cases and marginal figures. He's going to be able to look at the Fluxlander case and Mark McClandish's research. He's going to be able to look at Amy Eskers's research. He's going to be able to look at the McCaslin email that WikiLeaks dropped in 2016 that shows that he was working with the Roswell material. You see how all this is highly influential. And so therefore, there's big blocks, there's big pushback. As I said, Vanity Fair, The Atlantic, I've been contacted by a swath of media outlets, and I've given freely of all the material that I have for them, and I've put some of them on the record. But what I want to point out is stay with the story. The story will open up the doors. If you can get a congressional committee on the missing scientists and the ones who were eliminated over working around these fringe exotic technology areas, you can open up who was trying to orchestrate the UFO threat, because they're the same people. Remember, the people who were having McCaslin organize their committees are the TTSA. TTSA was run by the Central Intelligence Agency, Jim Semivan, and all the rest of it. Now, I'm not accusing them of abducting General McCaslin. Let's, not misunderstand. But they knew, obviously, about McCaslin's work, which is why they wanted him in their UFO threat circus. So they can give answers. They can be put under oath. This is crucial. And the congressional committees can get some real answers instead of grandstanding, with UFO personalities and Tim Burchett taking selfies and stuff like that. You can do much better. And the way that it's handled now is, it's on a semi-disgraceful level, but it doesn't have to be that way. And it can change almost overnight if they take the situation seriously. What else you got?
Jedi Kodo says, how can a congressional committee make a difference?
No, I think it is important. First of all, you're going to go into congressional committees anyway. There's going to be congressional committees around the UFO file coming up, as we've seen before. And they were spun out into disinformation traps. And like I said, a bunch of congressmen taking selfies and saying, like, I was in the skiff and I know all about UFOs, and there's demons up there. Demon UFOs. They had the VP of the United States, J.D. Vance, saying UFOs are demons. I can't think of anything more ridiculous in my entire life than seeing a VP do it. Even if he would believe that personally, it's absurd. You're going to go before a scientific community and say UFOs are demons? What the hell are you talking about? Why are you even vice president if you're talking like that? So, there's some really, there's a lot of education, let's say, to be had on this. The people who could do that educating were the ones who laid the foundation. A lot of them aren't here with us anymore. But people like John Mack, people like Stanton Friedman, they went deep into the topic and they understood that this is a cosmic Watergate. But people don't even know what the term Watergate means anymore. So, it's certainly, we're in a deep, deep conspiratorial territory on the side of the intelligence agencies blocking the truth on this. Now, they do want their version of a UFO threat thing to come out. So they're willing to come out with cherry-picked, tailor-made information. This is the danger. And that's the danger when you have committees giving information to people like Burleson, and Luna. Now, one of the things they did with Eric Burleson, which I find stunning, because Burleson was after the fact that I'm going to bring up a guy in here who's not even in the missing scientist list. His name is Matthew Sullivan. And he worked on very sensitive aerospace projects for the U.S. government. And he was working with Burleson and David Grush, who we famously talked about our interactions with Grush on this program. But whatever it is about the control of Grush through Mellon and all the rest of it, I still think that somebody like Grush wanted to get the real people to go on the record. And so the Sullivan guy agrees to do it. And according to Burleson, he and Grush were arranging this. And Sullivan dies very unexpectedly, suspiciously, in the middle of all of that. And, there's just too many coincidences and too many deaths that if you see the patterns, if you understand deep state history, even if you look at political committees and scientific situations and the things that have happened before, you can see the pattern. So, in my opinion, the committees can make a great deal of difference. But one of the things that they did with Burleson, which is, I think, is hilarious, is the CIA took him aside, put their arm around him and said, "You're coming in the skiff with us, and you know what we're going to do? We're going to show you how to summon UFOs." I kid you not. Can you imagine? Would you go anywhere with the CIA saying, "Hey, we're going to show you how to summon UFOs"? I mean, you'd probably wake up naked on an acid trip or something. And with them taking pictures of you, that would be the end of that. So, you know, this whole thing about what they would do, and the naivete of the Congress people being like, wow, the CIA is going to show us what UFOs are and they're going to summon them for us. Hey, you know, I don't think that the CIA can summon UFOs, but they have damn good holograms, and they can produce any kind of effect, hallucinatory effect that they want. How many drugs have they been working with? You know, how much technology, EMK Ultra, as it were. You know, so we have to be realistic about who we're dealing with. The minute you get the intelligence agencies involved, you're toast, because those are the people that are designing a program to keep the secrecy for themselves. And even though you have someone like Ratcliffe over at CIA, he has what I've described as a Stansfield-Turner problem. Stansfield-Turner was the CIA director under Carter, and Carter asked Bush, who was the CIA director, same President Bush, but this is before. And he said, you're the CIA director, give me all the UFO files because I want to get into this as part of my presidency. You know, it's 1977 and we're going to be hip about UFOs and get to the bottom of it. There's a movie coming out about disclosure. And George Bush says to Jimmy Carter, you have no need to know. I'm not going to tell you anything. And Carter fires him on the spot and installs Stansfield-Turner. But you know what? Stansfield-Turner hangs out like a man in the cold for 4 years because the CIA doesn't want to deal with him. And it doesn't matter that he's director, you know. So this is part of the things we need to get in our head. People like Gabbard, people like Ratcliffe, those are good appointees, but it's very hard with that system to make any real difference. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. It's X Series 223. We're going into Huntsville now. That's the next segment here. Get ready because there's some major explosions about to happen in relation to that. And we'll take your questions here in about 15 minutes, but we'll take one more right now. Got it.
Deep State You're Fired says, can you ever retire from aerospace? And Blue Man 2012 says, like the mafia, there's no way out.
I think when you get into those secret programs, it's absolutely true. But I think the trade-offs would be okay if you think that you are, you know, getting all this beyond science stuff that other people don't have access to. You might think to yourself, well, the trade-off is worth it. And yet, over and over again, we find some of the people, and this goes back, this is what I call the Forrestal problem. James Forrestal, the first Secretary of Defense of the United States, was appointed to the Majestic 12 group to look at all of the UFO files and decided, you know, this stuff's too important. We're going to need to address it with the public. And him stepping outside the box like that would find him suddenly experiencing spells of depressions and things, and supposedly jumping out a window at Bethesda Naval Hospital. Well, I don't think he jumped out, and I think it's pretty clear in the history books there that he was pushed. And the reason he was pushed, you know, was because the CIA didn't want anything like this out there to the public. But what's fascinating in my mind is that his very close friend was John F. Kennedy. When John F. Kennedy saw that happen, I think it heightened his own interests, and the CIA would reap the whirlwind when President Kennedy got into office, of course. All right. Huntsville, Alabama, and a very interesting history of what we're looking at there. A number of personnel from the missing scientist list directly coming from or being associated with Huntsville. There's a reason for that. I'm going to tell you by giving you the history here. First, give me a question because I need to get.
George Ivankovich, Huntsville and JFK connection and Forrestal jumping out of the window.
Yeah, well, we're just mentioning Forrestal, and actually, Kennedy wanted to get a handle on what was going on in Huntsville, and he visited the area to make a very major speech about space and, you know, how we're supposed to be promoting peace in space. One of the interesting things that Kennedy did there, which I find interesting, is even though Governor Wallace was governor at the time, Kennedy decided, you know, it's worthwhile for me to go there and make this speech anyway. And when he's standing beside Wallace, he does not mention the civil rights thing, even though they've just compelled Wallace to allow black students into the colleges. So very interesting indeed. All right. A couple of interesting side things about Huntsville. Lockheed Martin adopted this whole practice of making these streetlights around Huntsville in the shape of UFOs. And I kid you not, that's what they look like.
Oh, that is too cool.
But the idea of Lockheed just making, UFOs in Huntsville, isn't that a little obvious, kids? I love that.
It's awesome.
This is a shot I have actually of JFK and Wallace on his visit to Huntsville. Now, this is just 4 months before he's assassinated, in fact. And of course, the UFO-linked scientist's death, the conspiracy theory around Amy Eskridge. This story has gained a lot of steam. Her family, her dad in particular, who apparently all the fuss was about, all of his hidden patents and all of his secret research dealing with anti-gravity and plasmoids and all these other highly sensitive areas. A lot of people thought, well, they can play her and then get that information that Richard Eskridge, her father, has out there. And she was going to she had already started this exotic science institute for exotic science, and making it kind of a safe haven for people to go around and not be threatened by X-Protect. And she's very open and honest about X-Protect. I don't know if she was watching this show at the time, but she knew the background, and she talked very openly about McCaslin's assassination and not thinking it was suicide, and how she knew he was assassinated, and how she felt. McClandish, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Mark McClandish. Now, before we go to her, though, I want to go to an even earlier case, which will set us up. Well, I should go all the way back to von Braun for a moment here. So, on May 2nd, 1945, some 81 years ago in a week, there's a big meeting where we recruit von Braun and others as part of the defeat of Germany, and we take these scientists over here. 1,600 some odd scientists, but 70,000 personnel overall. And most of them rocket scientists out of the 1,600. One of the things that our friend von Braun suggests and requests and then finally demands is that he has the exact same command structure that he had at Peenemünde, developing the V-2 rockets and all the rest of it. The problem for the Americans is some of those people, including Walter Dornberger, were guilty of, creating slave camps and all the different atrocities associated with the war activities of the Nazis. So they keep getting these recommendations about Dornberger. And the Dornberger recommendations are, we've talked to this guy, in private, we listened to him, and he's trying to get the other Nazi scientists to pretend to go along with us, but to actually, he's so anti-American and he's so pro-Nazi that we'll never get this guy. And they recommend literally for his crimes that he be hung at the judgment at Nuremberg. But it is through von Braun that he steps in and he saves Dornberger. Later, Dornberger will develop the X-15, and he will also become the vice president of Bell Aerospace. In a crazy twist of history, which I have to say, I've tracked it through time and through decades, that you have to watch for these things to understand how that power structure works. Dornberger will have this incredible assistant protege, and that'll be Michael Payne. And Michael Payne will have a wife named Ruth Payne. Ruth Payne will befriend Marina Oswald when she comes over here under the guise of wanting to learn Russian. They will convince the Oswalds to move into their home. All of the evidence after the assassination that indicts Lee Harvey Oswald in the public eye comes directly out of the Payne household. You have to know and have to understand the connections with the paperclip scientist aspect around NASA, their opposition to President Kennedy, and their focus there, hanging out in Dallas, right in the heart of the whole thing, and Oswald being used as a pawn right in the middle of it. It's an aerospace battle that takes place back there. And, we've done documentaries on it. We've laid out the case for it. But I want you to keep that in mind as we go along with von Braun, Huntsville, and the death of these scientists. So I looked at that reconstituted group that our friend von Braun had put together. And one of the people that was in there as the launch operations directorate was Kurt Davis. And Davis would become the person who was most reliable in order to get everything going for our Apollo program to reach the moon. And those two guys would be the main drivers of the entire project. But Davis, as soon as the Apollo projects were over, became the key man on the UFO file for NASA. So you've got UFOs, paperclip scientists, NASA around this group immediately. And I might do an episode at one point just on the structure of the group that he assembled, because I think it's fascinating. But remember this, they are brought to Huntsville. And when they go to Huntsville, one of the things that is passed around there, and by the way, Huntsville is beautiful, and the entire area around there is just lush. But one of the things that happens is they have these kind of compounds for these space scientists to live in. And there are pictures of them hanging out, and they still have Nazi regalia on their walls and things like that. So they're able to live and be themselves. It's like, hey, this is a situation, you're putting it up with us because we're paying you, but you can still be your inner Nazi. You can still let it out. Okay, so we've got the background and the history going with this strange connection with von Braun and the paperclip scientists. I'm going to get back to it. What we're going to do is swing forward to the 2000s. And there's a remarkable researcher who comes from China, and her name is Ning Li. Now, the story went that Ning Li disappeared sometime in 2014. But what actually happened was that she was hit by a car and had tremendous cognitive difficulties as a result of this, and couldn't be the scientist that she was. And her husband actually died of a heart attack while watching this, watching her get hit by a car. And I wanted to say this when I said that we would track across time and across time. Well, any of you who've watched this program, of my interest in all of the interesting things that happened with George Ellery Hale and the Palomar Observatory and others, and how Hale was such a crucial figure there with Caltech and all the rest of it, including putting this incredible statue of Akhenaten on Caltech, and at the end of his life, dressing up as Akhenaten as well. He's also the one who had the elf climb in through the window and say, here's how you're going to do the Palomar Observatory. But it was here he was invited. He invited Einstein to come over to Caltech to be a guest, and Einstein did in fact accept the invitation. And interestingly enough, while he was here, guess what? Hit and run activity aimed right at him, and he had to do a somersault, which for a man of his age wasn't easy. And he avoided being hit by this car, which took off, but it tainted his visit dramatically. You could see this effort to remove scientists and people who know a great deal about these things. The program goes back and it goes back and it goes back. And you have to be able to grasp that history so you don't end up with an ex-FBI dum-dum on X telling you there's no connection to these cases. Why, some of them didn't even have a clearance. Hey, look, the Melissa Cassio's person, she was an administrative assistant. Well, if you look at the things that she was an administrative assistant for at Los Alamos, you need tons of clearance. You need the highest clearance, which is what she had. So let's get clear here. Ex-FBI people being out there around this case, tons of disinformation being spewed with abandon, as it were. But here's a picture of Ling, one of the few pictures that are available. And she was a brilliant anti-gravity scientist. And she was putting things on the record, literally, and shaking the entire paradigm. But I guess somewhere along the line, she didn't get the memo not to talk about this incredible research she was doing. So later on, there was an article that came out about her, which was done by Noah Logan for a Huntsville magazine. I'm going to read a little bit of it here, but we're going to see that this pattern goes back a way. And so he's going to talk to his son, and he's saying, well, I'd seen these videos about this woman. I knew there was a huge mystery there. Maybe the son can give me some details. So he says, I stumbled into this story the way you would stumble upon most good ones, sideways, late at night, through a YouTube rabbit hole. I had no business going down. The video was titled The Scientist That Discovered Anti-Gravity and Then Disappeared. Indeed. For the next 22 minutes, I sat in the dark listening for a creator who goes by Barely Sociable to lay out a story that felt less like a science documentary and more like a cold case file, except it was set not in some shadowy government compound, but right here in Huntsville, Alabama. Dr. Ning Li arrived in America from China in 1983, Star Wars Central, okay, and eventually landed at the University of Alabama in Huntsville Center for Space Plasma and Aeronomic Research. She was quiet, focused, relentless, and from 1991 to 1993, co-authored a series of papers that made the scientific community sit up very straight in their chairs. When Lee described, what Lee described was a practical pathway to producing an anti-gravity field using a high-temperature superconducting disk, or NTSD. And remember the high temperatures here, and then remember the Mondelez and how it can survive high temperatures as well. Inside an NTSD, she argued, the faint gravitational effect of each individual atom compounds across billions of atoms in the disk, feeding the thing roughly through 1 kilowatt of electricity, and so on it goes. She invited officials from Popular Mechanics to their Huntsville laboratory to see a 12-inch prototype in progress. And then the story started to spread around what she was doing. She claimed her devices were fully functional. Now, remember, when you get around anti-gravity or free energy, there's a long list of people who get bumped off or have untimely deaths. And so we who study these things are very aware of it. Those FBI people that they're sending out to put the kibosh on this, or the Atlantic or Vanity Fair, they don't mention anything about the background of these, the pattern of these deaths. In 1999, Lee left UAH and founded her own company, AC Gravity. I'm going to keep skipping ahead here. At a certain point, the U.S. Department of Defense awarded her a grant of $448,970 to continue the research. They saw the value in it, obviously. That's on the record. A document surfaced showed that Lee had delivered a presentation in 2003 MITRE Corporation Conference, the organization that manages federally funded research for multiple U.S. agencies. A private email was sent in May 2003 to colleagues in which Lee claimed to have observed 11 kilowatts of output effect during an experiment. What that number means exactly, nobody outside the classified file seems to know. After that email, the record of Ning Li goes dark. The silence did not go unnoticed. In 2004, journalist Tim Ventura reached out to scientist Eugene Podnikoff, one of Lee's peers in the field, with an email bearing the subject line, tracking down Dr. Ning Li. Now, I want to say this, that Ventura also was in contact with Amy Eskridge some 20 years later. So that guy had been around the block. Podkunov confirmed she was alive, still working with the Department of Defense, and simply unable to discuss her work. He also admitted he no longer had a working phone number or email address for her himself. Then in July 2008, a physicist named Jack Sarfati, we're familiar with colorful Jack Sarfati and his many interesting claims, of course, but he goes back to that original 70s, SRI group. Simply unable to discuss her work. In July 2008, a physicist named Jack Sarfati gave an interview that became the rocket fuel for every conspiracy theory that followed. And quote, this is his quote from the video. This is very important from a national security and political point of view, Sarfati said. One of the key scientists is a Chinese woman named Ning Li. She's disappeared and gone back to China. She was working at NASA and the Redstone Arsenal. Redstone Arsenal, remember, Huntsville, hardcore, that's the center. But she's disappeared along with the Marshall Space Flight Center. She's disappeared for several years now. The people at the Pentagon cannot reach her anymore. She's allegedly back in China. The Chinese are pouring money into similar experiments now. That's why our intelligence guys are very interested. The most likely people to develop the first anti-gravity propulsion technology are the Chinese. So, and I want to say this, I won't go too much into Sarfati, but one of the interesting things about him, and, he's done a lot of very fascinating advanced physics research, is he claims that when he was 12 years old, he got a phone call from the future. And you can't shake him from this claim. And that the people in that were in a UFO craft, and they were telling him on the phone that he was going to be a part of this whole thing. This guy is a, legitimate physicist, legitimate scientist, and all the rest of it. But he's hung out on that claim for
Is he the one
many
that
years.
has like the alien wife?
No.
Okay.
No. Yeah, that guy is interesting. But no, Sarfati, in fact, he's a colorful character, but that story is odd. It's odd just under any circumstances.
So
if you thought it was a put on, or if he actually believes it, whatever it is, it's still strange.
who were the beings from the future who called him?
They were future time travelers.
Were they human?
Human time travelers.
Okay.
Yeah. So just as a little side note there. So the years since the video's release have produced exactly one verifiable update. An obituary posted by Berry Hill Home website. Dr. Ningley passed away on July 27th, 2021. Now, again, what I want to point out is that she was in a car crash in 2014. She was struck by a vehicle while crossing a street on the campus. The accident caused permanent brain damage and led to an Alzheimer's diagnosis shortly afterwards. She never returned to work, and her husband of 46 years witnessed the accident, passed away from a heart attack. So you just get rid of that with one swoop, right? They don't kill her, but they make her basically a vegetable, and then all of her research goes away. And that's a way to contain the research. But this all happened in the heart of Huntsville, right in the middle of all that, after she had shot her mouth off about the incredible anti-gravity she had discovered and the wonderful things that she could bring forward scientifically about this. The control mechanism, the X-Protect group, is there. If you go to do that, that's who you're going to deal with. And so when we get now to Amy Eskridge, we have a little more background. Of course, there's a number of cases. There's a case from April 17th. This is a week ago. This is how much this pattern is with us. So a week ago, an experimental NASA pilot and his family, who were all working in Huntsville, they're heading to South Carolina, and the plane crashes, takes out the entire family. Well, the timing on these things is extraordinary, but Huntsville keeps coming up aces over and over again. And if you know anything about the background of the paperclip NASA struggle in the background, then, and you understand anything about what took place around the Blue program and how President Kennedy was eliminated over this whole thing, and that we've been living in the aftermath of it for decades, then these things start to open up. But let's keep it just to paperclip and Huntsville and the anti-gravity scientists for now, as we go deep, deep here before we take your questions shortly. This is the Dark Journalist X series, episode 223, the missing UFO file scientist. More of them, unfortunately. Paperclip, the continuity of paperclip government, and the X-Protect group revealed, taking your questions, the threat around anti-gravitics. And that's really at the heart of so much of this. And of course, in the McCaslin case, the memory metal directly developed. And I'm going to take a moment during this presentation to call out this Peter Thiel funded outlet that pilfered my story about the missing metal. Didn't do any research, just pilfered it, asked an AI bot to go in there and suck up the research and then spit it out as their own, drenched in all this, greasy Peter Thiel production. So I'm going to get to that. I'll get to that in a very serious way, because they're going to have a professional problem if they continue that. And if they don't credit my work, then, if they don't pull that thing down, they're going to have a real professional problem. But I'll get to that in a moment. A couple of last things around Ning Li. In a series of papers she co-authored with fellow university physicist Douglas Torr and published between 91 and 93, she claimed a practical way to produce anti-gravity effects. That's the line that I want us to keep in mind as we study this. All right, so Ning Li. Now, when we go to Joshua LeBlanc and Amy Eskridge, we are looking at people, again, young people coming directly out of this Huntsville milieu of anti-gravitics. And one of the things that's so sad about the death of LeBlanc is that he at 29 had already run an experimental laboratory about nuclear thrust for NASA, and he'd been running it for 5 years. So he was a real wonderkind, as it were. And when we think about that and the great, story ahead of him, and then when we think about the actual details of what took place there, it's extraordinary. And I'll read the articles that are associated, but the thrust of it is this, which is, that is LeBlanc right there. Young guy, genius. And what happens with him is unusual, again, because somebody mentioned Livelsberger earlier. I brought Livelsberger up during the Alex Jones show yesterday. And what happens with him is he does that same pattern where he leaves his phones at home. And when he leaves his phones and his information at home and he takes off, they never hear from him again. They expect to hear from him. He's nowhere to be found. Later, through him driving this Tesla, they find burnt up Tesla, and they can't identify the remains because they're charred beyond recognition. Eventually, they identify it as LeBlanc. And what happens in this case is they're able to track, because the Tesla had certain types of tracking devices on it, they were able to track him at the airport for sitting there for 4 hours, idle, not moving. So he goes to the airport, sits for 4 hours, and then it's off into the woods, blown up Tesla, burnt beyond recognition. And that's the end of a brilliant scientist. He was working in Huntsville, and he had taken that post there and had been there for over 5 years. Now, I'm going to track back to his story in a moment, but I want to jump to Amy Eskridge here. Amy Eskridge spent the last years of her life trying to bring gravity research into the open. So remember, her dad is Richard Eskridge, already a great name and talent in the anti-gravitics field. But she's claiming that there's a paperclip influence in that family now, and that's one of the reasons they're there. And then she's going to say some very interesting things about Huntsville, which will lead us all to conclude that actually Area 51, the joke circus show over there in Las Vegas, outside of Las Vegas, is not the center of this UFO development activity, and that Huntsville is. This is very daring, what she puts on the record here. But let's read a little more about her bio. We'll go into Amy, and then we'll roll the rest of this with your questions. How does that sound? Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 223, Missing UFO File, Scientists, and the X-Protect Revealed. Let's see what we have here about Amy. A chemist and entrepreneur with degrees from the University of Alabama in Huntsville. She co-founded the Institute for Exotic Scientists alongside her father, a retired NASA engineer specializing in plasma physics. Who else was specializing in plasma physics?
Was it Nuno?
That's Nuno Loureiro, who gets gunned down by Valente, the Brown shooter, for apparently no reason. And it's interesting, too, that after Valente had done the tragic crimes at Brown University, that he's able to, avoid a police manhunt and just walk into this guy's house in Brookline. Very strange. Richard Eskridge had publicly dismissed conspiracy theories linking his daughter's death to covert government research, telling News Nation there was nothing suspicious about it. Now, this, and of course, the sensitivity around the family's suspicious death, having a knee-jerk reaction to this, not wanting it out there, etc. It's understandable. But I also think that the media outlets that are pushing back against the story are trying to use it basically as a cudgel to make sure that the story doesn't go any further. And the truth is, under the circumstances of the fact that Amy herself said she thought she was in danger by doing this work, and then to end up in a very similar situation to the death of Mark McClandish, then we have to look at it from an investigative point of view. And as I've said before, they've done this around almost all of the important cases. So you've seen it around the Charlie Kirk case where they're like, oh, for the sensitivity of the family, don't go into it. And if you do it respectfully, then you're doing the family and the general public a service. So that's the angle that you would come in on. But I think it is important, again, to say, well, what was it that was going on in her work that would cause her to be a target in the first place? Well, I have a transcript of some of the things that she said in various interviews that might give us a clue as we go along. And as I read it, Miss Olivia, why don't you give me something in the meantime?
SV Harkin says Amy Eskridge's dad was working on propulsion for satellites. Avi Loeb's work for SDI was the physics of acceleration of objects in space. McCaslin worked on lasers on satellites.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, I'll tell you this. It's weird about Loeb because he absolutely wants to take down these stories about the missing scientists. He does not want them out there. And he's pushed back heavily against him. And very interestingly, he had, his lab is right over here at Harvard, and he had an interesting visitor in the last few days. And guess who it was?
It was Luna.
It was Anna Paulina Luna, the congresswoman. And she went over there and was like, Avi's doing such great work. Look, Avi and the whole, Galileo project is staffed by all CIA people, okay? Or predominantly. He included all those people on the roster. Originally, when he announced that whole thing, I thought this is going to be interesting. You have the scientist, he's going to do it, but his own background in Israeli intelligence and Talpiot and all that. And obviously, he wanted to staff his group, which is supposedly dedicated to looking for UFOs under these, guarded conditions. Well, this was supposed to be something special, but no, it just turned out to be a whole lot of CIA interference. Now, one of the things that Amy says in here, I'm actually going to quote from a couple of interviews, and they are done with her boyfriend at the time named Mark Sokol. And he's talked about her subsequently and all the different things and the ups and downs they had because there was some kind of professional jealousy going on there and they broke up and all the rest of it. But nonetheless, I do feel like the things he's put on the record, they obviously spent a great deal of time together. He knew a great deal about what her work was all about. So now here's what she has to say in that. Remember, this is just a loosey-goosey interview, but there's a lot of facts bombs that she drops here. And what she says is, quote, disclosure is going to come out of Huntsville, Alabama, out of Redstone Arsenal. Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama is the biggest deal that you've never heard of. It's the biggest deal that you've never heard of. Now, if you look for these interviews with Amy Eskridge, with Mark Sokol, you're going to find her talking about this. But I'll just do a couple of bits here so we know we're on the same page. It's the biggest deal you've never heard of. So we need a documentary to drop at the same time that establishes the credibility, because the fact is that we have deep and wide, extensive credibility that no one knows about because you're not supposed to. Yeah, that's interesting. You're not supposed to know about it because it's in Alabama. It's obscure. You're not supposed to know about it, and that's the point. So we need to establish credibility at the same time. that we drop the paper. People don't know what Huntsville is. And then she says, Huntsville is the biggest, she again says, deal on the planet that you've never heard of. It is now like Huntsville is the Silicon Valley of government, national security technology, and intelligence community technology and aerospace technology. Huntsville is like the hub, like there are numbers of 3 on the first strike launch list. If a first strike happens, 3 targets, Huntsville will be one of the main targets. And so she goes into this thing about Alabama. This is Alabama, dude. In the deep South, we're in the top 3 first strike because you haven't heard of us. We're in the top 3 first strike because you haven't heard of us. That's why it's on purpose. So we need to get that out there credibly before we disclose. Otherwise, it's like Alabama podunk redneck. Wow. And she goes on to talk about how it's all about anti-gravitics, et cetera. But she's saying disclosure is going to come out of Redstone Arsenal. That's where the action is. Now, that alone may have been too much of a disclosure on their side. They might have looked at her and just saw her as a loose cannon. The end of her life is tragic. And, whatever it was that happened to her, whether she was suicided or took her own life, whatever it is that took place there, there's tremendous pressure on her, as you can see in the interviews and in her writings and things. And the fact that her dad was so advanced on this and that their family came out through that paperclip milieu, I think is very significant. And here she is pointing it out.
Why did Amy Eskridge come out with podcasts anyway? What was she trying to communicate to the masses?
No, she was trying to raise what was going on in the background around secret anti-gravitics research and bring it before the public through this institute she had developed called the Institute for Exotic Development. And when you think about that, she knew that her dad had labored for years in the shadows with these secret projects around plasma, and that he couldn't let out certain things. One of the things, of course, I've listened to all of her interviews and got as much information about her. I've been aware of her since before she died. And I've seen the interviews, and at the time, some of the things that she was talking about, people couldn't connect the dots together. But when I was listening to her, what I would hear would be things like secret space program, and she would talk about individuals involved in the very research and investigations we were doing. Like Lou Elizondo, for example, she said was evil. She thought Hal Puthoff was highly manipulative. And these people had come around her trying to glom on to her dad's anti-gravity research. And she thought, oh, what I'm going to do? I have this person I know in the Army. I'm going to include him in these talks. And as soon as she did that, she says, Elizondo drops out of the picture. Puthoff drops out of the picture. They don't want to be in that circle where somebody else can confirm the type of manipulation that they were doing. So she says a lot of very kind of hardcore, hostile things about them. And that lines up perfectly with the kind of research that I've done about them. So that instantly let me know that she was on certain types of course. When she died, it's a tragedy. And it put this whole thing into a different context. One of the worst things about it, and so many of the media reports have picked up on this, is that she had warned that she was being targeted for being outspoken about this work. And she said that she was being attacked by energy weapons. And the types of effects that she was describing were exactly like we hear about Havana syndrome and the types of energy weapons that were being used in situations like that. And just a quick idea about Havana syndrome so we understand it. Havana syndrome is literally nicknamed after the fact that once we reestablished relations with Cuba in 2016, before we went back on it, we had all these personnel and CIA people go down to our embassy there, and they were all experiencing these bizarre symptoms. Some of them were microwave concussions. And so they'd have all these ringing in their ears, headaches, problems. They would feel sick and all the rest of it. Somebody was operating this, and they even studied it, of course, deep in the national security state. The CIA said, oh, no, it's not a foreign actor. That much we know. Very strange for them to weigh in on it in any case. But one of the things that she had shown, which I found fascinating, and I will show for you here before we're done tonight, um, were these very unusual burns that she had sustained from these types of weapons being used. Now, what's interesting is people around her, I found this very interesting. They would notice, like for example, the boyfriend would notice when she was under this type of attack and say weird things that would happen in relation to it. Almost absurd things like unpopped popcorn would pop and things of this
What?
nature. Yeah. And what's interesting is at one point when she was being attacked by these weapons, this is really weird. The boyfriend looked out the window and saw a van, and it would the way it was parked, it was aimed at through her window. These are
That's so X-Files.
it really is, yeah. And these are the types of effects that she would sustain, and they were strange burns on her hands. And they were in a pattern where, it's almost like if you were working on something and your hands were in the sun for a good deal of time, the hands were showing up with these intense, markings of energy waves being used on her. And I think that this led to different types of pressures for her to know she was under this type of attack. And she talks very openly about the fact that, different colleagues like McCandlish and stuff were done in by these same people. So I think she was feeling that in the back of her head, and she speaks very openly about it, which is what they've picked up on in these different stories. And what she says here, she says, if you disclose anti-gravity technology, if you stick your neck out in public, at least someone notices if your head gets chopped off. And if you stick your neck out in private, they will bury you. They will burn your house down while you're sleeping in your bed and won't even make the news. That's why my institute exists. So it's not a platform of credibility. So it's a platform of credibility and public facing persona. So like, sorry, my laptop's failing, so I need to establish that at least 3 months ahead of time, which is basically now to be real. And we need to do the documentary as soon as possible. We need to tell this story, and so on and so on. So there we can see somebody who sees the danger coming in, and she experienced it. People noticed it. This wasn't something that she was imagining. Now, the entire circumstance could have made her more paranoid, yes, but also the circumstances around her death have that classic, she walked off with a shotgun and ended herself in. Now, it's very interesting. I mentioned Burleson in an unflattering light earlier. Now I'll mention him in a flattering light. How's that? This is a letter he sent to Kash Patel on April 16th. And it's Congressman Burleson to Director Patel. I'm writing you with grave concern regarding the suspicious death of a key witness, interview subject, Mr. Matthew James Sullivan, associated with a federal whistleblower case brought by David Grush. The case, which has been deemed both credible and urgent by the intelligence community Inspector General, pertains to serious allegations of misconduct and unlawful activities. Mr. Sullivan's death was a local Virginia medical examiner case, and the manner and circumstances of his death raise substantial questions. Mr. Sullivan was a former U.S. Air Force intelligence officer, Department of War contractor. He was part of an integral part of the investigation. And basically, he was a UFO whistleblower. Now, he will also go on the record saying that the fact that Amy Eskridge had detailed this Havana Syndrome style activity, he will go on to present that and want to get answers from the FBI on that. That's the type of activity, that's the type of thing which under normal circumstances would work and should be the kind of things that the Congress people are engaged in, not selfies and saying, oh, they told me about UFOs in the skiff, get to the bottom of it, get to the heart of it. Why the researchers being taken out? What is it that they're studying? And what is the group, what is the agency that is doing this? And who are the people behind it? My suggestion and my advice has been to these committees to take the people who were pushing the UFO threat program that we've highlighted on this show and put them before Congress to get answers from them about who's pulling the strings in the background, what DoD billionaires are putting them out there trying to launch a UFO threat to create a UFO defense office. These things are all related. That's the crux of what we're doing here. I have more on all these researchers, but with the time going, what we'll do is we'll roll it all in as we're going. And Miss Olivia, we're going to start with your questions right now.
Okay, let's start with this. Down Jones Muller says there must be a connection between anti gravity and free energy. And Zonius says physicist Carlo Rovelli ties gravity to time. Time is literally a part of gravity. Anti gravity would, by necessity, mess up time, like apothium.
Yes, there's no question about it. Well, it is interesting that whenever you get around the UFO cases themselves, things disappear, people float through things, they get abducted through things. The laws of physics as we know them cease to hold. Then you have the introduction of other things like torsion physics, for example. And the example there is that torsion physics would make the atomic bomb look like a firecracker. Well, that would explain certain types of things like the physicist Robert Sarbarker saying the UFO file is the top. There's nothing higher than the UFO file. It is the top national security secret of the United States. So it makes us understand it a great deal better than, it's kind of glib treatment of, oh, hey, our pilots chase some light and here's a Tic Tac video and that kind of, lighthearted thing, which doesn't go anywhere. If you understand the amount of geopolitical change that's involved here, if you understand we're still in an oil paradigm, if you still understand that we're involved in oil wars, that we're in Iran under the same pretext that we were in Iraq 23 years ago, and it's a never-ending movie. It goes round and round, and you're going to get those types of results. Well, there's a great deal of alternative energy questions involved here too, but there's a different understanding of technology itself and also who, after all, is operating the craft that we're talking about. How did the secrecy become so entrenched, and who's benefiting from that secrecy? These are the types of questions that you need to bring forward in the situation now, of society now. Yes.
Did Amy Eskridge have not just a security clearance, an NDA?
Well, what's interesting about that is she made people, even who were personal acquaintances of hers, sign them.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's interesting. One of the things I think that her boyfriend, Mark, put on the record, I think is important, an ex-boyfriend, I guess, at the end. But he said that the people who were around her were after the father's research. And I believe that because, she was developing, working off the template of her father's work, and she was developing the Institute. So it seems to me, she certainly was brilliant in her own right, but I think that there might be something to what he's saying there. Yes.
I actually meant, was she breaking any kind of an NDA by
No,
she wasn't.
No,
okay.
No, absolutely not. But she was bringing the subject out in such a way, the exact way that those types of covert groups hate, which
and
is
she understood that. She understood the risk.
She talked about it, but she also said she felt that it was time limited, that they had to get all the information out. They could kind of force their own version of disclosure because it was coming through anyway.
So, yeah, did she actually articulate specifically what her agenda was?
There's no question that she wanted to bring forward. She wanted to get out of the whole wall of secrecy aspect. So she understood it.
For humanity's benefit.
Yeah. Well, for scientific, engagement.
She saw that science was being held back. That was
but her? What's also it's she grew up in the milieu of her dad being in black projects. Mm-hmm. You have to understand that, I guess I would say about her. What she was thinking, I think she put some things on the record there over and over again about, we're right in the heart of where the secrecy is. We need to get this out while we can. And she would go on to say certain things to the point of that, she felt like she knew that they were closing in on her work. So if it just so happened that she was paranoid and all the rest of it, Well, you could say that about everybody involved in this, but why are there so many? Are you telling me that every one of these scientists who were close was McCaslin paranoid? Did he wander away because he was paranoid? It's a stupid explanation. And the problem over and over again is when they send out the experts to do this, because I'll tell you something about this story because I've been right in the heart of it as we triggered off the entire thing through our reports and dealing with the media. In dealing with the media, look, this came up organically. And through coming in organically the way that it has, it's a story that's kind of uncontrollable. So the only way they can control it is to knock it down, to push it down with a hammer, or they can spin it off, which they're trying to do with the Chinese scientist story, which I'm not saying is not a valid story, don't get me wrong, but the American aspect of this story, that's the crucial part. This is what we're talking about because the X-Protect group, operational in American aeronautics and aerospace, that's what we're dealing with. And the influence of that group over time through a series of deep events in our own history here. And when you look at it that way, it's a small group, it's an intelligence group operating again in that shadowy corridor between the aerospace companies and the intelligence agencies. There's no way around that. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, deep into the soup tonight. And, looking at some tragedies, but also people who were trying to bring forward something that we could work with and something that might take society further down the road, move the culture in the right direction. And I think these people also understood what I've understood, which is that secrecy has no place in American life, and yet it dominates. And over again, they put us into a series of different ops and deep events, including most recently the COVID op and now the Iran war. The deep events have always been tied over and over again to the continuity of government players. And that's one of the wonderful things about Professor Peter Dale Scott's work around, and he's the man who coined the deep state. And I've worked with his research for years. We've had him on, many times. And I've had very, very long conversations with him. But one of the things I will say about Professor Scott is he noticed the pattern of whenever you got into a deep event in American history, 9/11, all the same people who had come out of the continuity of government program were standing right there in the heart of it. The Dick Cheneys and the Rumsfeld, they weren't there by accident. They had all come out of this continuity of government program. And I've watched for those, and I've spotted the trend beyond. I mean, this is beyond evidence. And now the idea is very clear to me that the continuity of government players with their secrecy, the UFO file, those things are merged. And I think as early as 1964, there were people deep in the system. I refer to them as ex-share. They're the same level of knowledge about the UFO file, but they're trying to get it out there to the public. And the ex-share people made movies like 7 Days in May, where very clearly, as I've shown, over the shoulder of the COG commander who's doing the takeover of the United States, you see Roswell, New Mexico. Well, Roswell, New Mexico wasn't even on the books then because the story was killed in 1947 and didn't resurface until 32 years later in 1979 through the efforts of Stanton Friedman. When you think of it that way, you can see the type of situation and paradigm that we're in. Everyone, you are watching the Dark Journalist Show. It's X Series 223. It's missing UFO file scientists and the Paperclip COG X-Protect group revealed. We're taking your questions now, and Miss Olivia, you're up.
Deep State You're Fired says, DJ, is the proposed / planned Americom consolidating Northcom and NORAD, etc., run by Paperclip continuity of government?
Yeah, it's. I brought it up a couple of months ago. It's very dangerous, as Northcom is dangerous. And people should understand that Northcom is a completely illegal body or extra constitutional body because it's a military, we had CENTCOM, we had SOUTHCOM. These were to look in and control these different areas around the world that our military was engaged in. But Northcom we only got after the 9/11 event. And it was put in as part of the emergency thing. We got Northcom, which basically means the military runs us. But they did something very interesting. They made the NORAD commander and the COG combatant commander the same commander as the Northcom commander. So he has a three-way position there. I say he's a triple threat. And don't get me wrong. I mean, anyone who's put into that position, they just have to do what they're told, et cetera. But I'm trying to show you that the organizational chart around these things, what it does is it gives so much power into one single individual that once they're the head of NORAD and Northcom, and they're the COG combatant commander, if that switch gets flicked, boom, instantly he becomes the ruler of the United States. And they split it off into regional governors for, who's going to control what. And then they're supposed to hold everything in place until what? Then we can hold an election. Well, who knows when that would happen? Would that never happen? Probably. So the continuity of government move and the types of secrecy and the lack of oversight are a tremendous, tremendous problem. And the fact that we still don't have answers about continuity of government are very disturbing. And all of the things that came out through the 9/11 Act and the emergencies like the Patriot Act and all that, that's all continuity of government, because the people who went away into the bunkers, like Cheney and others, wrote a Patriot Act while they were in there. And, this idea of a super complex bunker system that hides the military and has grown and sprawling. And it was originally necessary way back in the Eisenhower era. But what they did was they formed an entire underground subsystem, and that's a sub-government. And then it becomes a power system because there's no oversight, but tons of money is disappearing into that black hole. Well, what does that sound like? That sounds like the UFO programs going on in the background that we've heard about, the ultra secrecy, the missing money, and the black budget activity around it. And then, God forbid, you get these scientists who are on the beat and they're like, oh, wait, I'm working with anti-gravity. I'm deep on the UFO file like McCandlish was, or General McCaslin. And at a certain point, they're going to ride off into history and we're never going to hear from them again. Well, why is that? That is the central question behind the investigation of the missing scientists. And I'll tell you, we're getting tremendous pushback in the media on it. Just wait, because we will double down and show you just how deep this pattern goes. And it goes deep into the heart of the secrecy around the UFO file. Yes.
Okay. So Tim Houston says, but why now? What's the urgency? And SB Harkin says, I think they might be taking out people who can debunk the PSYOP.
Yeah, I like that. That's really true. Also, the PSYOP that didn't work was the DeLong Elizondo PSYOP that was pushed out there with the 2017 New York Times article when they thought they were going to get Hillary instead of Trump. So, you're living in the aftermath of a failed PSYOP on one hand, but the people who are controlling the whistleblowers like Chris Mellon, the DOD billionaire we've spotlighted on this show, and others, and, with the help of his cousin, John Warner, coming forward and telling us, they're working on a UFO threat. And he knows, his dad, Warner's dad, was MJ-12 himself, so Warner has a great deal of knowledge about this and speaks on a totally realistic level, without the glib nonsense around getting disclosure through the CIA. The idea that the intelligence agencies would ever give the American public any kind of disclosure is absurd on its face. All they've done is lie continually, including lie about the assassination of a president under their own direction. So you're not going to get answers from the Central Intelligence Agency. If anything, you need to reform the entire structure. So, but the UFO thing should exist totally separately from it. It should be all civilian researchers interfacing and getting information maybe from military sources. But the intelligence groups who manipulated it so heavily, the NRO, the NGA, the CIA, come on, how long is their reign of terror going to persist? And the truth is, the structure is in place for them to infinitely run this down the field. Now, somebody mentioned something about the timing on all this. Well, it's a wave, right? If you really take it we're talking about Amy's death, the public is catching up to this. But we've been talking about these things for a long, long time. This public is catching on to, oh, there was a secret space program. Well, we've been on the record with this, and we did the conferences on it a decade ago. So we've certainly had it out there. The thing is, now it's becoming the parlance of something in the news world or the podcast world, and so it's getting picked up, and they have to sift through it. But a lot of it, they don't have the background before it, so it's very important to get the right background, or you can't see what's going on. And there's a big push again to surrender authority to this external intelligence structure. The ex-FBI people will get you the answers around this. Oh no, there's nothing to see here. Those people, they bumped themselves off because they were depressed. Well, certainly that's a terrible situation when somebody does that. We just had a case of that in alternative media with the case of David Wilcock, and regardless of how anyone felt about his research, that's a long story there, but it's a sad thing. There's no question about that. And the timing on it was certainly strange, but I think for sure, regardless of any of that, it's a sad situation. So certainly those are sad situations when a person reaches a level like that. For the purpose of investigation, you need to look into the possibility, because of intelligence techniques around the secrecy, dealing with exotic and, let's say, special access programs, dealing with the UFO file and other types of technologies. You have to look into whether or not it's the appearance of things, and if these things are being, intentionally set up to look like suicides, etc. There's no question about that. And I think you can do it in a sensible fashion, in a respectful fashion, in a non-sensationalist fashion. But remember, the official story of the U.S. government is that Lee Harvey Oswald killed President Kennedy. So the official stories are just out there to protect the institutions. That doesn't have anything to do with anything. It always took the independent researchers to do anything different about it. And that's what we're doing here on this program. Miss Olivia, you're up.
Okay. Let's pivot to this. Robert is asking, how crucial was the work of T.T. Brown on anti-gravity as the precursor of the development of the present anti-gravity tech?
Well, he had it. I mean, we've done a number of shows on Thomas Townsend Brown, and Brown had it all the way back in 1955 or something, probably earlier, in fact. And I think that he ran directly into the issue of how do you continue to work as a scientist and maintain a kind of ethical position. And they wanted him to work on unethical projects. And I've spoken extensively with members of his family. And there's no question that this guy was on the cutting edge of all types of technology, fascinated with time travel and fascinated with anti-gravity, fascinated with the UFO file. In fact, he ran the biggest UFO group for 15 years, something like that. And in the 50s, when it wasn't really even that big of a thing. But Brown and his research, all of that was forced underground and into black projects. And one of the things, of course, the most amazing kind of invention that he came up with, the acoustic fan, which literally involved seeing people's lives across time. And there's a long story that goes along with it. But that technology was demonstrated in the basement of Rand Corporation, and his daughter was assisting him with it. And some of the people who were present, this is the late 60s, I believe 1969. Curtis LeMay was there. And Curtis LeMay famously was chasing around after the Melchizedek device, which was the thing that got out of the hands of the government, which could take down UFOs at a distance. This came out of the Tesla's research. But and LeMay is, very caught up in all of the things around the UFO file and protecting the secrecy at Wright-Patterson. Well, the demonstration of this is so hardcore that the next day, T.T. Brown goes to his daughter and says, You're going to Europe, you're going to college. Forget about all of this. You never saw the demonstration of the thing. We were never at RAND and all the rest of it. Very often, he would have them retreat to Nassau Island where they'd have armed guards, depending on the project that he was working on. So T.T. Brown is definitely someone I identified as the part of the X-Share aspect, trying to move the technology into the culture and out to the public. Yes.
Thunderbird Ted says, my father invested it in Brown in the early 50s and lost his money when it was classified. That sounds so fascinating.
How many stories like that do we have?
Yeah, we have a lot of people in the know in the ideas room. That's
I'm
sure.
gonna read you a little bit of background to flip back to von Braun to get a little handle on what Huntsville was all about and the setup there, but also to introduce into this conversation the Defense Industrial Security Command, which I've covered on a number of shows, but it has to be highlighted that we don't know much about what it is. You know, I mentioned WikiLeaks earlier. This is WikiLeaks from 1970. Nobody's been able to ever really explain it, but it shows how the aerospace interests were involved in the assassination of the president and then went on to form this kind of crucial coalescence of interests, I suppose you would say. The FBI and DIA Joint Chiefs were the controllers of the Defense Industrial Security Command, or DISC. But by the way, the pseudonym for this is William Torbett, and he was a Texas lawyer who had all these connections to the FBI, CIA, and had worked for Lyndon Johnson and stuff. And he basically dumped all this information out after he realized that the Garrison investigation was on the right track. The prized possession of DISC was the security division of NASA. Although ownership may have been reversed if one considers, in fact, that Wernher von Braun was the head of the security division of NASA, headquartered at Defense Industrial Security Command headquarters. This is troubling given that von Braun given who von Braun was, and the disgraceful lack of denazification carried out by the United States. The Soviets were irate when at the end of the war, scientists and rocketry experts who were under arrest were quickly integrated into the U.S. military after Hitler fell. In Blowback, Christopher Simpson points out that many of the people once accused of brutality to slave laborers and medical experiments on humans later are said to have nominal or opportunistic motives to join the Nazi Party, no longer ardent Nazis. Von Braun became an SS Sturmfuhrer in 1937 and clearly had some responsibility for rocket works, such as in Nordhausen with 20,000 dead from starvation. I remember Walt Dornberger was put on trial for those crimes. You have to remember Dornberger's role in the heart of all this if you want to look back to the setup, and we're going back to Paperclip and Huntsville. A little bit more, von Braun's emigration was first held up with a denazification hearing because he was thought to be a security threat to the United States. And it was assumed that the State Department and Justice would balk at his application. He was cleared with a sanitized dossier. To give you an idea of where old Nazis end up in the U.S., the cover of this volume sports a photo of von Braun riding in a parade car with JFK. Beyond the scope of this afterward to go into the role of Allen Dulles in recruiting SS General Reinhard Gehlen into the OSS, which subsequently became the CIA. And so this is that Nazi influence. And I want to say that the Soviets and the Russians and all that, they recruited their own paperclip Nazis as well. So, it's not like we got all the evil Nazis. So, no, everybody took them because they had the valuable advanced technology at their fingertips. And I would just say we developed it a little bit better in the grand scheme of things. Before we're done tonight, I'm going to show you a picture. It's one of the only pictures of all time that show von Braun dressed up in full Nazi regalia. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. It's X Series 223, the missing UFO scientists, the connection with Paperclip. Huntsville, remember, Amy Eskridge put it on the map. We just had Tony Moffat and his entire family from Huntsville a week ago go down in a plane crash. He was working on experimental NASA projects. and of course, Joshua LeBlanc, and the terrible tragedy of him being incinerated in his Tesla after doing the peculiar McCasland-ish thing of putting his phone back home, wiping his phone clean, leaving it there, and taking off without his smartphone. Very strange indeed. And of course, the classic shot of Kennedy visiting with von Braun shortly before his death here. And this, I think, is a picture for the ages. In fact, yes, Miss Olivia.
I'm going to bring this up. Luminessa Lux says those missing drones that have the capability to spray stuff are concerning, missing from New Jersey. Do you want to address that?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a developing story. I'll have more on it. It just started to break as I was coming out here today. But I do think, remember again, that they did the whole drone swarms in New Jersey, and it was a threat. Again, it was the Sky Event test out. They did this kind of data mining of the whole thing and figured out, hey, we can get a lot from doing this. And you had strange things like Anduril and others rise to prominence shortly after that. And I still remember when they were swarming Bedminster, which is like, you know, the New Jersey version of Mar-a-Lago for Trump. And it was very interesting. It was very interesting, all the things that were happening there. But what I will say is this, soon after that, you started to see Trump going around. What did he have on the back of his motorcade? Drone busters. He knew when he was president-elect, something wasn't right about this. He wasn't being given the intel about it. And however, I will say that they never, you know, the Transparency Administration never fessed up to what that was all about. Could they not get to the bottom of it? What about the idea of these drone swarms over nuclear bases or Langley? It doesn't make any sense. When these people talk to you from, you know, NORAD and things like that, and they're like, oh, we don't know what the drones are. It's complete bunk. I have to tell you, it is absolute bunk. There's no way you could put drones over a nuclear base without them being shot to smithereens, us getting the, you know, mechanics and the circuitry on the inside to figure out who had them and all the rest of it. It is ridiculous. And the idea that, you know, the Chinese balloon story that was floated out there in 2023 literally was absurd. That, oh, hey, we didn't realize this thing. And then they had the continuity of government commander come out, who's also the head of NORAD, and say like, oh, we're going to adjust our sensors because we didn't have sensors for balloons. Yeah. So nuclear defenses, gee, I guess all these years, you know, during the Cold War, they could have just floated across a nuke in a balloon. We would have been toast, right? It's dumb, you know, and for them to believe that we would believe it is even stupider, I guess. Yes.
Mike Fack, Amy Eskridge said that Hal Puthoff told her that the phenomenon is ultra-terrestrials, future humans coming back for genetic material. DJ, thoughts?
Well, I think Puthoff is a liar, and he would lie to
Although
somebody.
that's a theory, I kind of agree. I mean, like, it's a good theory.
Sure. I mean, we've done a roundtable about so many different possibilities for what the ET aspect could be. When I think
only
about
one, which of course it's not, right?
Well, no, absolutely. I mean, you know, you can definitely see that some of these things exist on a level which is almost like realm oriented. You know, some people see things like grays when they're in hallucinogenic states and things like that. What's that about? So obviously, there's an aspect here that is not just nuts and bolts UFOs. Come on. But we can't deny the fact that there have been very nuts and bolts experiences with abductees and things of this nature where they left visible, trackable devices on them. Now, were they all black ops? Doesn't seem likely, especially since the phenomenon is much older than traditional black ops. Is there a civilization here that was more advanced that, you know, and we've covered this extensively. They kept the technology over time, but over time they also became less and less kind of passable as humans. So at a certain point, they had to come up to the surface and take that biological energy and, you know, create clones with it. There's something interesting about that. And I have a quote here somewhere, but basically I'll do it off memory, which is basically that Sarbarker said, we studied the beings that were on the inside, and we realized somebody had constructed them like insects. Now, nobody else has ever really talked about that on an official level, but there is somebody saying it. The people who recovered bodies at Roswell later on, Pappy Henderson and guys like that, his wife would come out 40 years later and said, well, he said they looked like children, except their heads were large. They had very slim necks and no nose and things like that. These are the appearance over and over again of these beings. It's undeniable. It's intergenerational now. For somebody to say that they don't exist is absurd. But to question what they are is an excellent question. And the only problem that I had with the explanation that you just gave in that question is the person who was giving the information to Amy, which is Puthoff. And Puthoff, I think, has always been thrown in with the CIA. And I've told that story before. Not only does she think that Puthoff was evil after dealing with him, and that's a subjective thing, but it's pretty clear that's how she felt. But I've told you that T.T. Brown's daughter had that story. It's a very strange story, but I think it's fascinating that one of the craft that were basically like the Adamski type craft landed in their backyard farm in Virginia when she was, 10 years old, 11 years old. She remembered it vividly. And these beings came out and they were human, a little different, but they were humanoid. And he talked with them. And then they gave him something that basically looked something like an iPad, oddly enough, and that he kept it with him the whole time, and that he knew it was something that the intelligence agencies wanted to get their hands on. It almost seemed like some kind of communication device that he had. And at the end of his life, she went to visit him in the hospital, and she saw this person who was hanging over his bedside, basically trying to force him to tell him something. And she came into the room, and the guy left, and that the guy was Hal Puthoff, according to her. And that T.T. Brown took a look through the hospital window and said, do you see that guy there? Don't ever go anywhere near that guy. So, I trust the story, and I trust T.T. Brown on that whatever they were trying to do, try to get from him, they were trying to get at any cost, indeed. And he wanted to make sure that after his death, his daughter wouldn't do that. It's very interesting, and I want to put this on the record, that the book that was written about T.T. Brown, and it's an extensive book, that the author attributes her entire experience, kind of ET experience, as a dream because he couldn't handle it. So this is the problem that we get into when people do biographies and things. And she told me about that, and she told me about all the differences that she had with the author around this book, and how, eventually he wasn't even promoting it because she had this version of it. And the only thing the author was interested in was creating this kind of love story piece about her and this other guy who was an assistant to Brown. So, that guy too, Paul Chatskin, he's done other books that were pretty good, but that book about T.T. Brown, although it's loaded with all of her rich anecdotes, is colored by his own lack of acceptance of the more kind of, say, supernatural aspects. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, deep tonight in X Series 223, The Missing UFO File. Scientists, Paperclip, Huntsville. What were these scientists trying to tell us? Some of them went on the record, and they knew they were saying, I'm not going to commit suicide. I'm not suicidal. And then they would show up in these circumstances, and we're supposed to accept that, well, they committed suicide, It's a tough subject. It's a difficult one. And when you wade into those waters, you need the background. And it can't be just, a flashy headline for a news organization. You have to go deep. And if you go deep, you're going to get some real answers. And I think the answers are worth finding, but there is a little bit of that Planet of the Apes thing, which is you may not like what you find. Go ahead.
Wendy Eater. So, how do you think the public would handle an announcement from our government that aliens are real and they're here now?
Um, well, they they would be smart not to trust the government in relation to that, because I don't think the government would ever give them the truth about what the actual situation is. But I do think there are moves to get power groups cutting back down to size, because I think that there's been this element of X-Protect blackmailing the regular government that you and I deal with. And those people don't like to be in that trap. So, and I think this is a lot of this goes to the Trump administration, the first version of the Trump administration, although he seems more prone to the trap in the second one. I'm going to read actually his statement, which was supposed to become an executive order here. And this is the statement that came out just before General McCaslin disappeared. Quote, based on the tremendous interest shown, I'll be directing the Secretary of War and other relevant departments and agencies to begin the process of identifying and releasing government files related to alien and extraterrestrial life, unidentified aerial phenomena, and unidentified flying objects, and any and all the other information connected to these highly complex but extremely interesting and important matters. The key part here is begin the process of identifying and releasing government files related to alien and extraterrestrial life, and then UAP and UFO. But he says other relevant departments, you see. So the Central Intelligence Agency. And that's where the clash really is. This is where the heart of it goes. You might say to the DOD, give us all of your UFO files, etc. Trump knows different aspects of this on a level that others don't because of Uncle John Trump, who worked on the UFO file, who worked with the Tesla papers. And he's alluded to it in a number of things. Oh, Uncle John, and we've done, Tesla, Trump, and the time capsule, the whole background on Trump and Tesla and Trump and the UFO file. But it's John Trump, and that is the uncle who's so key and pivotal here. So if he has that knowledge going in, he has a great jump over other presidents who didn't. And I would say that the other one who was really clued in on it all was President John F. Kennedy. That was a big problem for them as well, because you're talking about an entirely different reality paradigm, an entirely different setup for how things would go if you're dealing with that, how it would impact the economy, the control system, and all the rest of it. It's a gigantic leap. So in terms of how the public would deal with it now, I think they're being conditioned to accept a UFO threat, and I wouldn't. I literally wouldn't. I would throw the intelligence agencies out of the business and literally go for civilian researchers around the UFO file, and they can force things out of the government that way. Yes.
Okay, so there are people talking about the use of the alien threat, or
Yeah.
at least alien visitation disclosure, um, in relationship to the end of the petrodollar. So I'm just
Oh.
going to throw all these
Yeah,
together.
yeah.
Mermaid Moxie says Future Forecasting Group reports that Trump was brought in to oversee the bankruptcy of the USA and bring in a new system based on a basket of cryptos and metals.
Yeah.
Kane76 says, DJ, do you think any of this will change if we lose the prime reserve currency if BRICS is successful in destroying the petrodollar? And Rotten CryptoBit says, tokenize the US debt, fold into world coin. So how can all of this disclosure psyop, what's the relationship to the bankruptcy of the US in particular?
There's a lot of money involved. Can't tell you how much money is involved in the development of the technologies around the UFO file, and also being there when all of that hits. So that's why you see a lot of Congress people, et cetera, coming up to the microphone and saying it could be interdimensional, it could be extraterrestrial, who don't know anything about UFOs at all, because they're told you have to be in the game on this because we're coming out with it. And it's the limited hangout version that concentrates on the threat. It doesn't get anyone anywhere closer to the actual truth. Now, it's a great mystery. Remember, I want to say this also. which is there's a government aspect with the UFO file, but there's a personal aspect that has nothing to do with the government. Forget about the government. The government is sort of like a clearinghouse of other people's intentions, right? It's not a truth-bearing entity by a long shot. So when you look at this, you could say something like, groups who study it, it becomes intergenerational at a certain point. So, for example, we learn about Betty Hill that her mother saw a UFO in 1931, or her sister saw one in 1957. She's abducted by one in 1961. So you see, this is a long arc here of interacting with something else. It has nothing to do with the government at all, right? So when we think about it, think about your grandparents or people in the past there, they also had to struggle with the issue and the idea of what this is all about. And many of them might even have had experiences. You might have heard about those experiences. I have. So this is something, it works on a human level. We're already working with it. There's no organization that can tell you what it is. And that's what's crucial. The problem is some of the effects of our own advancing in technology has had us interface with this thing. And when they got to a point like the Roswell crashes and things like that of interfacing on a major level with this stuff, they decided we're going to keep it all silent. We're not going to tell the public anything about it. And that was a decision that they could say was a national security decision. There are a number of different things, we didn't want to challenge religion or whatever it was. All those things are excuses ultimately, especially after keeping the secret for decades and decades and succeeding generations. And remember, a number of people in families, et cetera, already knew the truth because like a Jesse Marcel type had run across all of the alien artifacts already. They had already seen them. Many people had seen bodies, et cetera. So there's already something else going on here. The problem is the way that they want to release it is in a way that, like the Peter Thiel alien God thing. And here's where I get to give my speech about the Thiel-oriented outlet, and that's the Jesse Michaels thing. Jesse Michaels has been stealing material from this show for many years now, and it's gotten ridiculous. But the latest thing was the most ridiculous. When his show, which is funded by Thiel, he's funded by Thiel, he comes out of Thiel, and Thiel had him as an investor, even though he had no training as an investor. It's a very strange story of him meeting Thiel while he was an intern at the Daily Show, and Thiel, doing all this stuff to kind of promote him and run him through so he would do this investing for him. Something very strange is going on there. This guy has nothing to do with UFO truth or anything like that. And I've kept an eye on him. And recently I did a major thing on X telling him to stop stealing my work outright, because I am not going to have my work stolen and then turned into support an alien god scenario by some billionaire Thiel who's testing out different scenarios and has rolled this guy out. So I was very clear with Jesse Michaels that he needs to, one, give credit when he uses my ideas. In the case of the last thing, except for the dumb Chinese book that he used, which was supposed to be some revelation, really wasn't. It's just Alternative 3 is a Chinese book. 95% of that thing is just ripped directly out of my shows, and probably with an AI bot with not a lot of intelligence and with a lot of slimy production on top from Peter Thiel money. It's incredible ethical disgrace to be called out on it and to continue to do it. So the only thing I can say to Peter Thiel's bitch boy there is that you are going to have a gigantic, and I mean gigantic, professional problem coming from me if you don't stop stealing my work and in re-engineering my work in this false fashion into an alien god BS thing for Peter Thiel. So you've been professionally and ethically informed. I did it on X. I'm doing it here. You're going to have to cite my work. You either take down the last video, which stole from my work, like all the others do, or you add the credit to what you ripped off from my show. Okay. So you're going to do one or the other, or you're going to have a big professional headache. That I promise you. Also, the fact that you're involved from childhood with Sam Bankman-Fried, the big ripoff artist, and that you promoted him on your show, and that you encourage people to, work with him, and then you pulled that show as soon as he got into trouble. I think your audience deserves to hear something about that from you. So I don't think you're an honest broker on the UFO file situation. I think you're someone who's greasing the skids for Peter Thiel's alien god scenario, and you're not going to use the X series or Daniel Liszt and Dark Journalist to do it. I hope you got the message. I really hope you got the message, because otherwise you're going to have big problems, and they're going to be professional problems of a nature, because unethical activity like that, somebody like me keeping an eye on it and seeing what you're doing, it's not good. It's not good for your professional future. So, your dad and his sketchy stuff involved with working with Goop and being a partner with Gwyneth Paltrow, all that stuff, this is an independent research community. I don't know if they told you that you could sell billboards into it for a false alien god trick with Peter Thiel, but people get to the truth in this environment, and we'll get to the truth about your dad and also his sketchy activity with Drew Barrymore and all that stuff. So, you decide how you want to deal with it, but you're not going to steal my work to promote Peter Thiel's junk. So that's my statement on it. And here's my request from you. Immediately put a credit on your last video about the work that you stole to make that video from my series. That's one. Two, on any other video where you've incorporated my work, put a credit on that, put a citation on it. And anything that you don't put a citation on, take down, because it's false advertising to not say where it came from, or to say researchers say, no, I'm the researcher that you stole it from. So I say, take the stuff down. And if you don't take it down, add the credit. And if you don't add the credit, then that's a problem. But that's my request, professional request to you, to do something honorable and ethical in relation to this. And two, I'm going to state this for the record. I don't believe that you want the truth in relation to the UFO file. I think that you're trying to grease the skids for investment in Peter Thiel and all the heart of this. And that your relationship with Thiel and Bankman-Fried, who you grew up with, and your dads were lawyers together and all that, is going to come out and show what you've been doing and pandering to this audience. So keep that in mind. Do yourself a favor and cite Dark Journalist research. And if you don't, then it's very clear. But I hope that you do. And I don't want anything to do with Peter Thiel, and I don't want anything to do with you. So do yourself a favor and stop ripping off my work. Okay. There we go.
I'm sort of speechless now.
Yeah, well, it had to be said. I said it on X, and he's just left the stuff there, and it's not the kind of thing that you can ignore, because a lot of these guys get into the mindset that you can sit back in Peter Thiel's ivory tower and nobody's going to do anything. No, you're going to have very big professional problems if you don't add a citation source to the work that you're stealing. Yes.
Okay.
You can move right along.
All right.
I wanted to make sure we got
With
that.
so many eyes in the sky / space, has anyone ever confirmed or denied the Dark Knight satellite?
Well, look, here's what you're going to have to do. You're going to look back to a period where Nikola Tesla himself said that this thing was out there. But by the 1940s, when you get into 1949, there was a problem, which is that both the Russians and the Americans were dealing with the fact that there was a satellite out there before they had put one up. And this is very crucial, because there's an important book back there that is not often understood, because people think, oh, everyone knows about what paperclip is, et cetera, et cetera. Wasn't actually true. Actually, nobody knew von Braun was a Nazi and all that stuff in the 60s when he became the face of NASA. But what was absolutely fascinating and maybe crucial is that in the 1980s, because of the number of things that were going on, there was a resurgence of, we need to get to the bottom of this Nazi issue. And so they investigated in Congress Project Paperclip, believe it or not. But before that happened, there were researchers out there, people like Mae Brussel and others, who were doing it. But there was a guy named Clarence Lasby who wrote a book in 1970, very early on, Project Paperclip, German Scientists in the Cold War. Watch how he describes the first launch of an American satellite and see if you don't see some reference to sabotage here. The first American entry, Vanguard, was an acute embarrassment. On December 6th, before a national television audience, it exploded and collapsed into the sands of Cape Canaveral. In the meantime, the von Braun team had obtained Defense Department authorization to revive Project Orbiter. They hurriedly converted their Jupiter C, an elongated Redstone, into a satellite launcher. On the evening of January 31st, 1958, they were prepared for the launch. Floodlights were turned on and the missile stood like a great finger pointing to heaven, stark white, alone on its launching pad, wrote Major General John Medeiros in his description of the event. The air in the blockhouse seemed literally charged with electricity. As the missile started its slow, majestic rise, you could hear almost every voice in a chorus that sounded like a prayer saying, "Go, baby, go." It did, up, up, and up, faster and faster. In Huntsville, the citizens quickly changed the signs entering the city from the missile center of the United States to the space capital of the universe. And in Washington, Senator Mike Mansfield extended his personal congratulations to the von Braun team. Their success, much to the credit of the United States and the whole world, the American people were proud of their German scientists, but they believed that other and better ones had helped the Russians. President Eisenhower himself attributed Sputnik to the events of 1945 when the Russians captured German scientists at Peenemünde. Well, you can see they got theirs and we got ours. But here's what's fascinating. Somewhere in the middle, somebody else had one. So what was it that was floating around in 1949? This is the question. And the Black Knight satellite is one of the mirrored aspects of that, the kind of street legend, what was floating around there in the 1940s. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. This is X Series 223, the missing UFO scientists, and Paperclip, Huntsville, the X-Protect connection revealed. We're taking your questions. We'll take a couple more questions here, and then we will go off into that great night, Miss Olivia.
Okay, George Ivankovich. What about Reagan's quote in his autobiography about a spaceship that could have 40 people inside?
Yeah. What was he flying around in? This is interesting. And Reagan was very keen to give the American people the truth. This is what is misunderstood dramatically. And Reagan, when he's giving those speeches and he's saying, if there were an alien threat, what would we do? Well, behind the scenes, we know, and it's now on the record, that he sat with Gorbachev at Reykjavik. And Reykjavik was a huge breakthrough, although publicly it looked like it produced nothing because they had no nuclear agreements or anything else as a result of it. And what happened is that Reagan took him aside and said, I want to know if you'll join with us if the UFOs attack us. And Gorbachev, who put this on the record with Charlie Rose, pre-sex scandal, said, you know what? Yes, we will. Of course we will. We'll be there and we'll fight them together. But he said the conversation they had about it was absolutely serious. Now, why did Gorbachev let on about this? Because for years and years and years, Reagan had put this stuff on the record. And Colin Powell writes this incredible autobiography, and he's like, you know, over and over again, Reagan would put his ET fantasy into these speeches, and I would go in there with an eraser and take them out. And he said, I'm really ticked off at myself that I didn't take them out for the UN speech and for a speech he gave at a Maryland high school. Well, I went back and found the speech at the Maryland high school, and it's exactly that. You know, what would we do? I wonder how many of our differences would vanish if we were being faced with an alien threat from outside this world. And I'll tell you, how you can know somebody is on the real track with the UFO file is if they're aware of Star Wars SDI as the watershed moment. and the development of the UFO grid, defense grid. Amy Eskridge talked extensively about Reagan and SDI, and her dad obviously had passed down that knowledge. And this is what we need to understand. It's absolutely crucial to include Star Wars. And if you include Star Wars from the point of view, for example, of Colonel Corso, he said Star Wars was the dedicated effort of the Russians and the Americans to demonstrate to the UFOs that we had redeveloped their technology to a point where, we weren't intimidated by them. That's the kind of threat lens that they go through. But it shows the incredible effort that was going on behalf of the government to fend off against this more dynamic, more technological, and more gifted technological machine. They were dealing with things that could outdo any of our craft by a long shot. And our chemical rockets looked like a joke by comparison. So at least they had redeveloped the UFO file enough to do that.
I'm ashamed to admit it. It never occurred to me before that Reagan may have had a near-death experience when he got shot.
Oh, yes.
And
yeah,
or certainly an out-of-body experience.
he certainly did.
And that, people experience being more spiritual afterwards, sometimes more psychic, or having a greater affinity with off-world beings. It just sort of tracks.
No question. Absolutely. No, I think that Reagan was spiritual, and I'll tell you why. There's not only a series of interactions with him and Manly P. Hall and his fascination with Manly P. Hall's work. And of course, Manly P. Hall coming directly out of the mystery tradition and interfacing with those mystery schools, I'm convinced. But Manly P. also is one aspect of Reagan. But if you go further back, there's a lot of mystery school references in a book called That Printer of Udell's. And I found that printer of Udell's hanging out back there in a series of kind of mystery school type people in their background. And the book is a mystery text, basically. But that was Reagan's favorite book growing up. And I instantly was like, oh, he understands. But he also talked about that mysterious figure who showed up at the American Revolution. And this comes from the work of Manly P. Hall, getting these unusual conversations about the Constitutional Convention and how there was kind of a lack of backbone to get it signed at the time to really get the American Revolution going on. And that stranger comes up and makes this incredible speech, and nobody knows who he is. And he's the one who inspires them to all stick together and that they can face off against the hangman's noose of the British as long as they're holding on to their ideals. And Reagan was always inspired by that whole thing. It drove his entire entry into politics. And the truth is, it's quite metaphysical. The other thing is that Reagan, as governor, had ordered his pilot to chase a UFO. And, he kept people around him like Gene Dixon and others. So he's a very mystical guy from a lot of different perspectives. He was a very manipulated guy as well. But, he came out of that Hollywood machine, which was already manipulated, and then into the political machine. But, he obviously, as president, he did some remarkable things as well. But SDI Star Wars was certainly one of the major ones. Yes, Miss Lee. And remember this, when we're dealing with the Nazi aspect and the overhang of Huntsville and all that. The one thing I want to point out is that as we started the show, Space Command is coming now to Huntsville. So, that was a major maneuver on Trump's part. But it sort of does reignite the power base of Paperclip there. That's what I see that as a move for. And it's a move against somebody else, and that is who is hoarding everything there in Colorado. In Colorado, the home to Northcom, the home to the Continuity of Government Command, NORAD. I see the move to Huntsville to line up with this earlier adoption with the Paperclip side. And that's what I think We get around people like Amy Eskridge trying to tell us that Huntsville is basically the real Area 51 and putting it out there as if in a panic from her soul to get this information out. We have to listen to that, just like we need to look at the deaths of people like, the engineer LeBlanc and the things that happened to him, and the things that happened to Tony Moffat and Ning Lee. It's overwhelming pattern, and it's all coming out of Huntsville. So again, you have to do X geography at times. Part of that's Huntsville, part of it's Albuquerque, part of it, of course, is California, and I've pointed to Pennsylvania and Moon, Pennsylvania. So I think we have to understand X geography is different than what we've been told about, Area 51 and hey, Bob Lazar, I think that one's played itself out. Yes, Miss
Seems to me
Olivia.
the safest thing that these scientists could, if they wanted to take a stand, is to stand together. And if they could somehow get together, because we know they're monitored,
Yeah.
right? Like on the steps of the Capitol building all at one time, have a press conference and say, this technology exists. It's
Yes.
suppressed. The American public needs to know it.
Absolutely.
And then the media would have to report on it.
Well, what you're talking about is very interesting because we're seeing where these heroes failed. And, they were trying to bring something forward and they were thwarted. So they are heroes. President Kennedy was a hero. He was thwarted by, people who were in power centers and didn't want any of this to come out around the advanced technology side. But he was surrounded by, on the inside, people like Lloyd Berkner, who had been at Antarctica with Admiral Byrd and had run the Robertson UFO panel and had set up the International Geophysical Year. These were the people who were saying to him, here's the moon speech, make it we choose to go to the moon and Mars. And these are the people who were kind of an ex-share ilk. They were trying to move the culture forward. President Kennedy is trying to get everyone on board with the space program. Because he's trying to make it humanity's battle against the elements, and the great power of the frontier and the people who conquered the frontier to make a new world. Well, he was saying, we've done so much to develop the world. We need to do that in space and create an ideal. The first thing we can do is create a peace ideal in space. So President Kennedy's approach is actually the approach that we've needed. And unfortunately, we continue to create these tremendous military budgets, and we continue to weaponize space. And where does that end ultimately? Are you going to blow up the moon with your nuclear reactors? You can't bring weapons into space. This is what President Kennedy understood from facing off against nukes and preventing a nuclear conflagration that would have enveloped the United States, enveloped the Soviet Union at the time, and they would have set off nukes in Cuba. So President Kennedy was a hero for saying, no, I'm going to do a blockade. I'm not going to bomb Cuba, and I'm going to try to get the Soviets to come back to their senses. And also, it's an incredible thing when President Kennedy met with Khrushchev. Khrushchev heard all these things, always a lightweight playboy, and forget about it. And so Khrushchev tried to pull all these stunts on him, and he swore at him. This is documented if you go back into the history. And Kennedy did a very interesting thing. He held his cool to show his own confidence about his peace mission. And after a while, Khrushchev started to respect him because him trying to throw him over as the lightweight playboy, swear at him, throw him off, and all the rest of it, Kennedy kept his composure. He didn't, swear back at him. He kept it cool. And as a result of keeping a cool head, he eventually got Khrushchev to sign what? The Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. No one ever thought in a million years that the Russians would sign it. Kennedy got them to sign it. So they knew he was serious. And it's quite interesting because when Kennedy was shot, there's this incredible video of Khrushchev running to the kind of condolences book and making sure that he writes his own condolence there for the whole world to see. So he ended up respecting Kennedy dramatically and working with him. They had decided to work together to, in a non-warlike fashion, work in space. So Kennedy puts together in October 1963 cooperation with the Russians in outer space matters. Then he sends these various memos off to the CIA directors saying we're going to share our high threat cases of UFOs so that we don't set off nukes against each other when these craft go over our nuclear bases. They seem to be fascinated with our nuclear bases. Well, this is a bridge too far for that X-Protect group, and that's what you get. And as a matter of fact, the kind of cream of the jest of the whole thing is Kennedy heading through Dealey Plaza, and who is he going to meet? He's going to meet Berkner, who he had organized all the space peace proposals with, and Berkner is, after all, in charge of the UFO file, So those things are there in history. And, it depends on how we look at things, I guess. Miss Olivia, you're up.
Auntie Social says, party at the Waffle House after the show.
I'm all for that. We're going to take 2 more questions.
Maureen O'Brien, Gary McKinnon and the non-terrestrial officers?
Oh, yeah. We brought that to the surface very early on. And one of the things I tried to do with the Secret Space Conference was somehow beam him in. And let's make no mistake that Gary, who had ostensibly hacked into NASA, saw these things. And he was looking for information about UFOs, and he saw the off-world officers list. So obviously, there's a whole secret organization that is operating in relation to all this. And when you think of it that way, you really have to say, well, that was the tip-off, and the fact that Obama went over there and talked to Prime Minister Cameron and all the rest. Well, that's interesting too, because it came up in conversation that the press was asking him, what are you going to do about Gary McKinnon? And Obama didn't say, who the heck is that? He said, we're going to try to extradite him through traditional English law channels. Well, that showed you right away that they knew very clearly who they were talking about. And they were not able to extradite him and charge him over here because of his Asperger's. But I think he put a tremendous thing on the record in relation to this. And we get an incredible glimpse. So he's one of the heroes of transparency in relation to the secret space program. And that's a big deal, actually. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. Whoo! X Series 223, the missing UFO file. Amy Eskridge, Huntsville, LeBlanc, Castland, Clandish, just extraordinary people. And people who were involved in working on a tightrope. And when that tightrope slipped, the X-Protect group was silencing them. Some of them went on the record to try to tell us that this is what was going on in the background. How many of us are listening to that? Well, I think we're starting to hear it and really get the message. So with disclosure coming in hard and heavy for this summer through the Spielberg movie and through the various activities around Hollywood and President Trump's, disclosure order and all the rest, we need to be way ahead of the curve on this. And really the missing scientist story is helping us to do that because they gave their lives for something. And we, on our side, we can acknowledge it. We can get to the bottom of it. And we can get past the glib or toss-off versions of their lives. Oh, they got depressed. They bumped themselves off. And yes, they all happen to be in secret programs, but, it happens to scientists too. I don't buy it. In a lot of these cases, there are too many. There are too many. And the combination of factors, when you look at it, the network and the spreading out of this group, if you watch it, you can get to the bottom of it. The best way for us to get to the bottom of it is to push it into that transparency zone like we do on this show. And remember, if you ever doubt the power of a single show or one lone outpost of truth, just remember that we've been rippling the truth on this show directly there with you in the ideas room. And now the missing scientist story is on the desk of the president and the FBI for investigation. That's the kind of thing you can do with a lone outpost of truth if you stick to the truth and you get past the podcast pop clicks and, the wide open mouths and the thumbnail on YouTube. And Miss Olivia, you go.
Okay, so I think the big thing coming out of tonight's show is Huntsville, and which
Yes.
I knew nothing about.
Yeah.
Outdoorsman says Huntsville, Alabama has a rail tunnel to several places across the U.S.
Uh-huh.
And Graphics Nuts says the Scientific Coalition for Ufology has its office, or had, in Huntsville, Alabama. I found it on Google Maps last year. Now it is not found. An article on it listed David Grush as an officer. Now, no info.
Yes, I heard about this. And I think it's fascinating. I'm going to follow up on that. As a matter of fact, if you could send it to me at admin@darkjournalist.com, I promise you by the next show, I'll have the whole background of what happened to them. I want to read this about Joshua LeBlanc, who was the 29-year-old aerospace genius who was running the nuclear, that whole nuclear thrust experimental program out of NASA, and unfortunately showed up fried to a crisp in his own Tesla after leaving his phone and other effects at home. Even before the charred body of NASA engineer Joshua LeBlanc was discovered in his burnt-out Tesla, his family had raised the alarm about his mysterious disappearance. The 29-year-old electrical engineer working on nuclear propulsion projects in the Space Agency's research laboratory in Huntsville, Alabama, had uncharacteristically failed to turn up for work, and the family feared for LeBlanc. He had left his phone and wallet at home. They had feared he had been abducted. Tesla tracking technology revealed the car had been parked at the local airport last July for 4 hours on the morning of his death before being driven towards his office. It crashed on a rural road and the car burst into flames. LeBlanc is far from the only scientist in a sensitive field of work linked with NASA to have gone missing or died in odd circumstances. In fact, it is claimed that 11 people involved in America's space and nuclear programs have disappeared or died in unusual or unexplained circumstances in recent years. The oddest thread of this puzzling tale is that a number of them vanished after simply heading out for a walk. So there's something in the instructions, there's something happening which says you need to leave your phone at home. In some cases, you have to wipe the phone, and you're heading off into the great blue yonder. And you're going to meet with your handler. They're going to give you those instructions. And I'm reminded also, of famous cases in history, like when Oswald, the accused assassin of President Kennedy, just wanders into this theater. They see him moving around from seat to seat looking for his contact. He even sits near a pregnant woman at a certain point when there are tons of seats that are available. And he's trying to figure out, is this my handler? Is this the one I'm supposed to meet here? So those types of things, that type of steganography that's going on, where they instruct them to do these things, it's hard to decode exactly what it is, but something about it means you can't be trackable because you have to leave that phone behind, for example. And, the whole idea of burning him beyond recognition, so it takes 6 months even to identify him. This is really, whatever it was that they wanted to eliminate him for, they wanted his entire memory, out, just gone. They wanted him to be disappeared. And whatever it is that these people were working on as teams, we have to look at them as teams. And at times it's been said, well, they were all individual cases with no connections. This is what Vanity Fair says, Atlantic says. Look, all you need to do is look up who McCaslin's assistant was at the Wright-Patterson lab. The assistant was Monica Reza. It's a fact. A number of media entities know it's a fact. They've put it on record that it's a fact now. Only the Atlantic, only Vanity Fair, only these other, programmed ex-FBI agents are going out there spreading the disinfo. So come on. We know that Reza was there. So, and it's my opinion that it's Melissa Cassios that's the intermediary from Los Alamos feeding their information back and forth. So we know they were associated with these projects, and we also know that Reza had the patent on Mondelez. So, Mondelez, that patent is probably one of the most significant patents to come into the space arena publicly in a long, long time. And it actually changed the entire paradigm of how we do rocket launches, because we can now do it without the Russians completely, we were relying on to a ridiculous extent. So, these things are factual. You can't blow it off as, oh, that's some TikTok conspiracy. Come on, people. We have given the media organizations, you can track with them, track with Fox, track with Daily Mail. We've given them the facts. They've watched these programs, and I've sent them the background. So they haven't picked up on all of it, by the way. A lot of them won't touch the memory metal aspect, which is the most crucial aspect, in my opinion. They're going to have to get to it because, it is undeniable. Yes, Ms.
Well, it's a tough thing. I mean, all of them, their owners go to Bilderberg every year.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's true.
So they're part of the cabal
Yes.
that is keeping this under wraps and suppressing humanity's evolution. So what are you going to do?
Well, what's interesting is the way the story came up was so organic that it's my opinion that all they could do was roll with it. So when they were rolling with it, it picked up a momentum. The entire story picked up a momentum. You know what I mean? So they had to deal with it on that level. And I'll tell you, really, it's you and I in the Ideas Room who gave it that momentum. So congratulate yourself, pat on the back for yourselves. And of course, Alex Jones, incredibly brave, putting these reports out there and having me do it to his audience. That's created this snowball effect of these stories. Now, they might try here over the next couple of weeks to knock down the stories or take some of the energy out of them by referring to this Chinese scientist stories, which are interesting, but we can't get the same type of detail on because we're in the United States. So it's very important to keep the emphasis on these scientists. We can add supplementary cases just like you do, looking at cases around the world, sure, but you cannot replace the emphasis and the focus on these people, because if you get to the bottom of this, then you're getting to the heart of UFO file disclosure versus the CIA UFO file threat activity. I think it's very clear, and I'm happy to stand behind it. I've given the case out there, and as I absorb more facts about it, I'll add to the case. And if there was anything, if some of the cases, when you get people, let's say they're talking about 12 scientists altogether. Well, if out of the 12, one of the two of the people, it turned out that, they disappeared and it was, for some natural reason. Like Jason Thomas's case is strange because they're trying to say, well, he walked into a lake. You see how that happened? Well, why did Jason Thomas go ahead and put his smart watch in his mailbox? And Jason Thomas had kids. Do you think he wanted to, leave his kid behind? Well, he's in a sensitive program. Let's go there before we just dismiss him as some guy who walked into a lake. Especially given the fact that there's a great proximity of these scientists to these types of secret projects. And he was working on a project that you could basically, I could sum it up as basically a kind of cloning type product where you are cloning aspects of human cells. So, is that the kind of thing that you might run afoul of in relation to aerospace? Absolutely. Look, you have to understand, so many of the people around aerospace are dealing with aerospace medicine because there are so many factors organized around the human body going into space. It's a gigantic medical field. So don't tell me, well, Jason Thomas was in the medical field. It's absurd. You know, how does the work that he was doing relate, the secret work he was doing relate directly to this type of activity? That gives you a much better map. Miss Olivia, your last question.
Well, I'm just going to throw this out there, which we've covered. Copernicus says
Yeah.
Philip J. Corso's Wikipedia page was deleted in August 2025 with the search result redirected
that's
to the article
right.
for his controversial 97 book, The Day After Roswell.
Yeah.
I think that's really important that we keep that in mind because they love to memory hole things.
Yes.
And,
Good point.
you know, someone had to go out of their way to delete his Wikipedia page. I want to finish on this question. SB Harkin says, it still all relates to Elon, I'm afraid. So where does Elon
well,
fit in all this?
well, because
I
of
mean,
the
he is the you know, the big aerospace guy. You know,
yes,
he's at least the face that we see.
No question. Well, I would say this about Elon, where we would get some answers about this. First of all, of course, it was von Braun who went on the record and said in his rather interesting book, I think I have it here, but it's the Mars Project, and he says the Elon will rule with his committee of 20 over Mars government. So that's in 1949. It's undeniable. So he's predicting that. Now, remember what we know about von Braun. One, his mother was psychic, sought after by the Nazis for counsel on state matters, war, and everything else, but also sought after by everyone in the town for everything from, the birth of their child to medicine. I mean, this woman was a remarkable psychic. So she has two sons, and they're both scientists, and Magnus and Wernher. And Wernher seems to have inherited this psychic ability. And one of the things that he does is when he's running NASA, he goes to our friend Russell Targ, who had a very distinguished career at SRI, doing all this remarkable work on psychic remote viewing, and then moved on to his own incredible career of psychic investigation. And we've had him on the show, and just an incredible track record that he has. But von Braun goes to him and says, I want you to develop an ESP psychic testing device that I can use for NASA astronauts. So what does he know about psychic energy in relation to going into space? This is a remarkable thing. And what's wonderful is, of course, is that our friend does it, and that Targ actually makes this machine to test their psychic faculty. And if you go to espresearch.com, that little app that he developed is still there, and you can test your own.
It was fun. I used to use it. I got really good.
I mean, Targ is on another level. I'll just put it that way. Okay, a couple of things I wanted to read before we go here. A little bit of the examples of people talking about the memory metal. Remember the Roswell witnesses? Well, here's a couple. This is William Brazel Jr. and, of course, Mac Brazel's son. Quote, one of the pieces looked like something on the order of tinfoil, except that it wouldn't tear. You could wrinkle it and lay it back down, and immediately resumed its original shape. Quite pliable, but you couldn't crease or bend it like ordinary metal. Almost like plastic, but definitely metallic. Dad once said that the Army had told him it was not anything made by us. A little piece of it, it wasn't tinfoil, it wasn't lead foil, a piece about the size of my finger. The only reason I noticed the tinfoil, I'm going to call it tinfoil, I picked the stuff up and put it in my chap's pocket. Might be 2 or 3 days or a week before I took it out and put it in a cigar box. I happened to notice when I put that piece of foil in that box, the damn thing just started unfolding and flattened out on its own. Then I got to playing with it. I'd fold it, crease it, lay it down, and I'd unfold it. It's kind of weird. I couldn't tear it. The color was in between tinfoil and lead foil, about the thickness of lead foil. There were several bits of metal-like substance, something on the order of tinfoil, except that this stuff wouldn't tear and was actually a bit darker in color than tinfoil. More like lead foil, except very thin and extremely lightweight. The odd thing about this foil was that you could wrinkle it and lay it back down and immediately resumed its original shape. It was quite pliable. You couldn't crease it or bend it or burn it like ordinary metal. It was almost more like plastic, some sort, except that it was definitely metallic in nature. I don't know what it was, but I do know that Dad once said that certainly it wasn't anything made by us. Now, when we hear these, and I have over 50 testimonials about it, including the very strange statements of the fact that one of these army guys gave it to his 10-year-old son, who was a budding magician. And the 10-year-old son was doing these shows with it for a year, doing all these weird shows before these little crowds, before Roswell, before the government is like, oh my God, he's using the memory metal, get him. And they did. They grabbed it and they grabbed the metal.
Wait, I have never heard that story before. Where did that surface?
Oh, that's in the Don Schmitt's work when he goes into the Children of Roswell. And yeah, if you go into those stories about Roswell, it gets more and more fascinating because a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, did keep little parts of that. And the stuff was almost supernatural in a sense. Also, what's not often talked about is when people who had touched the hieroglyphic bar would say they would get weird visions by holding it. So now, you know, that's putting it, you could see the government dealing with this stuff, you know, like going to their superior officers and saying, well, you know, when I touch the metal bar, I get visions in my head. What do you do with that? You shut it down pretty hard till you figure out what's going on. That's the Apotheum effect in earnest. Everyone, what a fantastic show tonight has been. And one last question from you, Miss Olivia.
I love imagining this kid doing magic tricks.
I know.
This little nerdy kid. That's incredible.
I could do a whole Children of Roswell show. I did.
Oh, I'd love that.
I did a series of Roswell Reignited shows, and people wrote to me. They're still writing to me about them, but they're so unusual, and there's such incredible information about Roswell that's never come out or come to the surface at all. So yeah, we'll do something related to that. I might literally blend it in because I think the Roswell metal is the key to the whole McCaslin and Reza story. Your last question.
Well, this thing, I don't know if is this true? AJC Trading says McCaslin's wife, who's a musician, wrote a folk song about the general going missing 4 years ago. That's true.
Yeah. There are lyrics that are kind of like that. I have heard that, and she is a musician, and she was also an astronaut, by the way. She's a very interesting lady. But yeah, it's one of those odd little things. But again, you know, just like her statement was a little bit strange after he disappeared. She said, well, you know, he could have been taken away by a mothership, I suppose. I mean, you know, she was being a little loose with it, but also dealing with the trauma of him not being there. So, you know, I don't know.
I don't know. She didn't sound very traumatized.
Well,
has she come out since and said anything?
No, see, I'm always of the position that people do get into a state of shock when their loved one disappears like that. So I didn't.
Well, you're giving her the benefit of the doubt.
Of course.
But I heard the 911 call.
And
which was sus as hell.
Well, it's unusual. But one of the things she says is that it's obvious that he planned to disappear, but that she didn't think that he was doing that or was going to harm himself or anything. But her first reaction upon seeing his phones and everything else there was, oh, wait a minute, he planned to disappear here. So yeah. No, it's interesting. Susan McCaslin, you know, we haven't heard much from her, but if there were any developments in the case, I bet we would hear about it immediately. The problem is he, like Reza, has disappeared without a trace. And it's very hard, you know, to disappear without a trace. And in the case of Reza, a few feet from where she disappeared, they found her hat and then the trail ended for the dogs. So the teams that show up to get her are super professional X-Protect teams, and forget it. They know how to just make a person disappear. So, in my case of looking at those two, I would say both of them were grabbed by the same group. And as far as I can tell, both of the people we're talking about are no longer with us. So that's the tragedy in it all. And I feel like we're doing them some justice tonight looking into this. And we're also demanding of our own authorities to look into these cases, because the groups that are doing it may not even be specifically government groups. They may be extra constitutional entities operating inside the government. That also has to be taken into account. So let's keep that all in mind and keep them in our prayers, because they had the bravery to do this, to get on that target list. And one of the wonderful things that Amy Eskridge has done has been to focus us on Huntsville in relation to the anti-gravity developments. I think that is very significant. And I think that the death of Joshua LeBlanc in relation to this further underscores what she was trying to put on the record there. And the death of Ning Lee before that also further underscores it. So it's a massive, sprawling story. I wish I had better news to bring about it, that some of these people were alive or whatever. And it is a tragic and sad story. There's no question. All of it touches our heart. We can do the best, I think, for the people involved by bringing the truth forward. And that's what we'll do.
I'm
So
getting some requests for you. Did you print out a picture of von Braun in his Nazi regalia?
Oh, yes. Let's see here. Oh, boy. You might have set me on a task here. Well, you're going to have to say something while I look for it. Otherwise, we're going to be.
So Kevin Boyer says, Freemason in Huntsville. I'm putting it out pretty plain here. What do you know about the Freemasons in Huntsville, Alabama? Anything?
Oh, well, what's interesting is it's one of the oldest, it has one of the oldest Masonic lodges there. I'm aware of that. And the ones that is associated with Redstone are the oldest in Alabama. They are quite fascinating. Oh, yeah, I always like to show this. That is, of course, what Jesse Marcel found with the hieroglyphics on it. That's the beam, and it glowed purple. That's all I could say about it. Go ahead.
That's
What
weird.
else you
It
got?
glowed purple, like it was lit from within? You mean?
Yeah, remember that one? Look at that one. Absolutely fascinating.
I thought it just had it was sort of imprinted with almost like ink, like on the surface, not that it
Yeah, you know what's
radiated.
interesting is I've looked deeply into what he had to say specifically about it, and he said that it actually seemed like it was beveled, so it was rising off of the metal, and it was kind of glowing purple. And there's a closer shot of it. But it's very important because the hieroglyphic part would be echoed over and over again in different stories dealing with the UFO file. We need to understand the connection there. And by the way, if they're this supersonic, super tech group out there, what are they doing using hieroglyphs, right? Well, maybe they visited our ancestors as well. So, yeah,
It
that's
still looks
something.
like a mathematical equation to me.
Yeah, it does. It does, actually. I agree with you. And I think it's almost like a knee-jerk thing to say that it's a hieroglyph. But then again, it's a very interesting, it may be literally a completely foreign interstellar language as possible. What else have you got?
Well, I mean, it just goes into crazy territory. We have a
Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah.
We have a lot of things to
All right.
follow up on after this.
Yes.
Oh God, I don't know. Should I just read the super chats? Go straight to
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
all right, let's do that. Okay, hang on.
All right.
I'll start at the beginning. Eurythmy is fun.
Yes.
Durbin Downey, Harry Zeri, Amarillo Gunrunner, Jono Red Star, Jake 9797, Jedi Kodo, Nancy Mercier, Tim Houston, Erica Swenson Elliott, Real Norman Smith, DTM 190, Ray Story, Mermaid Moxie, David 4739, Mike Brosnahan, Sarah Jane, Tommy Van Gompel, Robert Scott, oh, hold on. Something just happened.
Yes.
Oh, something crashed. Hold on.
Oh, yeah.
Fibonacci Colace. So thank you so much for your super chat.
Incredible. Well, we really appreciate it. And to all our subscribers, thank you for your support. I'll do some shout outs here before we leave. And I may end up posting the picture of von Braun on X because unfortunately I have double barreled the setup here. It would take me a little while to locate it. And who we got out there? Yes. Porky Goss and Tim Houston. What's the temperature in Australia, Tim? Club of Rome has to be a local band.
That's a good name.
Oh, used to be. Okay, I got it. Wow is wild. Indeed. Couldn't disagree with that. Crazier the better. Well, I said strange days have found us when we started. There's no question about it. Jim Morrison had it a long, long time ago, long before I was born. He had it going. Wild stuff, kids. Najat. It's great to see you, Najat. Miss Olivia's checked us in the chat. And let's see who else we have here. Shelley Thompson. It's great to see you out there. Fantastic. John Gauss, great show. Thanks. Great to see you out there, John. And yeah, we delivered a lot of new facts on the missing scientists in this case, but there's more to come because there's more settling out on what's going on in Huntsville, and it is dramatic, let me tell you. Yes, great map, DJ. Thank you, Blue Man. It's good to see you out there, sir. Let's see. Hugs. Thank you very much. Miss Olivia checked us in the chat. There we go. I'm going to go back here. Ion purple or purple gold purple? Excellent question. Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, that's printer perfect, so we don't know how perfect that is, but you tell me. It does. It makes me, because that's the actual one that Marcel did, it gives me a weird feeling, I have to say. I've always felt that Marcel's integrity was riding high. And by the way, one of the things that he did say before he died is that he didn't talk about everything that he found because he couldn't, because he was still protecting the secrets of the country or whatever. And so even 30 years later, he was still protecting those secrets. I've heard about tunnels in Huntsville also. Yes, there's no question about that. And I'll tell you what's weird too. I was going through these statements of various paperclip Nazis, and they have them generically after the fact where they ask all these scientists about the different things they were doing. And some of them could add their communications anonymously. And one of them said that he'd spent 10 years digging tunnels for the Nazis, and that as soon as we brought him over here, he continued with his tunneling. So we have the Nazi tunnelers now. So, you know.
Well, I mean, immediately you think deep underground military bases, right? What?
I've always said, I want to live underground. I want to live underground. Freemasons in France got caught up with hitman assassinations. Whoa. Well, sounds a little Permindex-ish. Another episode for all week. Thomas Ball, it's great to see you. Good to see you, worshipful Massa. Mr. Debs. Let's see who else we got here. When Elon puts on the uniform, then we will know for sure. Exactly. You got it. By the way, when he says that there are no UFOs, he can't. He has to say that. DARPA's telling him. DJ spent 47 minutes ironing those pictures. Exactly. Let me tell you, they are printed on some of the finest quality paper, and they tell a story all their own. They really do. This picture, I think, is quite remarkable because they almost had taken out Einstein. Remember, scientists are on a tightrope. But in this case, the UFO file ones, it was like there was no net. And that's the nature of the problem, I suppose. We need to have the net. So maybe some of what we're doing tonight can bring on that net. Someone says, Olivia Wings Girl, thank you. Congratulations, Olivia. Nicely done. Let's see who else we got here. Patel is an alcoholic. Well, he's run into some trouble. I will say that. Seems like
DC is just, they're all alcoholics. It's a pretty good assumption to make.
Absolutely. So many great people out there. I know Kate's out there. It's great to see you. Star Walker, fabulous show tonight. Thanks. Great to see you all. And MH370, somebody said that. Yeah, very, very strange case indeed. No question about it. We are children of the night, indeed. Everyone, what a great, great time to be with you tonight. Dumb's deep underground military bases, in fact. Absolutely. We will see you all next week. And, it says end broadcast, but after all,
never really ends.
Never really ends. And remember that you're going to have the time to have a fantastic weekend. And we will see you all next week with a fantastic episode. And of course, Dr. Farrell's interview is coming up. Gigi Young is coming up. Whoa, Gigi has some great stuff to share. And you guys won't believe it. And go right over to Gigi Young on YouTube as well and find out the incredible things she's been putting out lately. And never let it be forgot. Once there was a Camelot, and
there can be again.
There can be again. We can bring it on, and we can hear that kind of energy, the spirit of JFK bringing in that vision of Camelot, which we all need so badly in the United States. And the United States can truly be a light to the world if we can get out of the clutches of the deep state and the defense, the incredible, and I mean defense contractors and the pressures that are going on there. So pray for a better world, and across the world, of course, in places like Ireland and the UK and all around Europe and all around Australia and all these different places just going through these dramatic changes. We can all get through it if we get through it together. And we'll see you all next week.
God bless everybody.
Have a great night.